Welcome back to Paranormal M. Thanks for joining me again tonight. Before we start, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next video. We're going to begin with a story about something the family called Toby. It was in their house for a long time, and according to the person who shared this, it did more than just scare them. It left marks behind, and it affected more than one person in the family. So get comfortable, and I hope you all sleep well tonight. I want to tell you about something we used to call Toby in my house. And honestly, even saying that name still makes my stomach tighten a little. Toby was not some harmless shadow in the corner. It was cruel. It left things behind. Marks, bruises, little half-moon shapes in the skin that looked like teeth had pressed there. Handprints that stayed red long after they should have faded. Whatever it was, it took a lot from me when I was young. It took away that feeling a kid is supposed to have at home. That feeling that your room is safe, that your bed is safe, that the dark is just the dark. For the longest time, I thought my mother didn't believe me. I really did. I thought she was brushing me off, trying to soothe me by telling me I was imagining things, or that I was having bad dreams, or that kids sometimes make stories bigger in their heads. But later, I realized something that changed the way I saw all of it. She wasn't dismissing me because she didn't believe me. She was trying to survive it too. One afternoon, my mom was asleep in her bedroom. Her boyfriend at the time, Derek, was lying beside her. My sisters and I were away at our dad's apartment for the weekend, so the house was quieter than usual. This was before everyone had phones glued to their hands, so Derek was just reading a paperback near the window, with the afternoon light spilling across the bed. At first, my mom looked peaceful. Then she started moving. Not waking up exactly, just moving. Her fingers curled into fists, then opened again. Her legs kicked under the blanket. Her feet twisted like she was trying to pull away from something. Derek noticed right away, but he waited a second, thinking maybe she was just having a restless dream. Then she started crying. Her eyes were still closed, but tears were running down her face. That was when Derek got scared. He reached over and shook her shoulder gently at first, then harder. He said her name. He patted her arm, then her cheek. Nothing worked. She would not wake up. Then this small sound came out of her, almost like a whimper, and Derek told me later that it didn't sound like her. Not really. It sounded frightened in a way that made the whole room feel colder. And then, without warning, my mother shot upright. Her head tilted back toward the ceiling, her neck stretched tight, and both of her hands grabbed the sheets. Her mouth opened wide, and she screamed, but her eyes stayed closed. Derek panicked. He yelled her name over and over, shaking her, trying to bring her back. He said his heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was trying to break out of his chest. Then the scream just stopped. My mom opened her eyes like she had only been lightly sleeping. She looked at Derek, confused and irritated, like he was the one acting strange. He asked her what happened, asked if she was okay, asked what she saw. She just stared at him for a moment. Then she lay back down, rolled over, and went right back to sleep. Derek did not stay in our lives much longer after that. But the thing that finally pushed him out happened on the 4th of July. That night, my sisters and I were outside with sparklers, drawing bright little trails through the dark. My mom and Derek were sitting near the pool, watching us run around while fireworks popped and cracked all through the neighborhood. You could see distant bursts of color flickering above the rooftops. At some point, Derek went inside to grab a drink from the kitchen. I didn't even notice he was gone until he came running back out. He didn't have the drink. His face was pale, and he looked genuinely terrified. He stopped near my mother and said, "There's a man on your stairs." My mom just looked at him and asked, "What?" Derek said he had walked through the living room, heading toward the kitchen, and when he turned, he saw someone on the staircase. Not sitting exactly, crouching. A hunched figure with a long nose, tucked low in the shadows, watching from the steps. He couldn't make out the face, just the shape of it, the way it held itself, the way it seemed to be waiting there in the dark. Derek did not go back inside for his drink, and not long after that, he was gone for good. The worst part is, after he left, we were still there, still in that house, still trying to convince ourselves we weren't losing our minds. But by then, I think all of us knew the truth. Something was in that house with us. So my mom called me the other evening, and she wasn't exactly panicking, but I could tell right away that something had gotten under her skin. She said, "You are not going to believe what your uncle just told me." Now, my uncle is a grown man, well into his 50s, and he is not the type to say dramatic things for no reason. But apparently he told her he thinks there's something in the house. He said that early that morning, while it was still dark, he heard 2 sharp knocks on his bedroom door. Just knock, knock. He got up because he thought maybe it was my mom, but when he looked across the hall, she was asleep in her room. So he went to the bathroom, came back, and tried to settle down again. A few hours later, he heard the knocking again. Same sound, same door. But that time he ignored it. Then, a little later, he heard a woman's voice coming from the other side of the house. That part really made me pause, because my husband once told me he heard a woman's voice from that same area. The only difference is, my uncle couldn't make out what she was saying. He just knew it was a woman. And then it got stranger. That same morning, he was sitting at the kitchen table doing some work when he saw someone peeking around the corner into the kitchen. He couldn't tell who it was. He said it was more like he caught the shape of a person, just barely, like they had leaned in and then pulled back before he could get a real look. The kitchen sits at the end of the hallway. All the bedrooms are on one side, and then the hallway opens up into the kitchen, living room, and the rest of the house. And honestly, based on where everything has happened over the years, what people have heard, what people have seen, I keep getting this feeling that someone is staying in that hallway. Not just passing through it, staying there. The really unsettling part is that I saw something in that exact same spot a few years ago. It was the middle of the day, and I was washing dishes at the kitchen sink. In the reflection of the window, I kept seeing someone moving back and forth near the kitchen entryway, right where the hall begins. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. But then I turned around, and I saw it again, and I knew who it was. It looked like my great-grandmother. When I told my mom that I thought maybe that was who my uncle had seen, she got quiet. Then she told me something I had never heard before. She said that after my great-grandmother passed away, she used to get this weird fear while washing dishes. She always felt like my great-grandmother was going to suddenly appear behind her, not in a cruel way, but almost like she was going to surprise her. And that gave me chills, because I had seen her from that exact place while I was standing at the sink. So this is what I think. My great-grandmother was a huge part of my mom's life. She helped raise her. She was almost like a second mother. And I think that after she died, she came back to our house. Or maybe she never really left. I know it sounds strange, but I think she's been there with us all along. And for some reason, I really believe she stays in that hallway. There is actually a whole other story about why I feel that way, but that is something I would have to explain another time. I want to say this clearly, because I know how it sounds. I'm completely serious, and this is not the only strange kind of communication I've experienced. It's just the first time I've really tried to put this one into words. For years now, my dishwasher has made these sounds. Not just normal machine sounds either. There are 3 distinct tones it can make, and over time I started noticing that they seemed to happen with meaning. One sound rises upward, almost like a little confirmation. It tends to happen when I say something important, think something meaningful, or make a choice that feels aligned. Another sound drops lower, and that one feels like a warning or correction. Then there's this short little blip, kind of hesitant, kind of in between. That one always seems to tell me to slow down and be careful with whatever I'm thinking, saying, or about to do. And honestly, it has taught me a lot. It's made me realize how much every thought, every action, every intention matters. I've written things down during late-night sessions, and it reacts while I'm writing. Even now, as I'm talking about this, I feel that familiar sense of approval around it. The wildest part is that on the side of the screen, there's this setting that says, 6th sense. I mean, come on, that feels almost too on the nose. My mom still doesn't fully believe me, but even she has said before that the dishwasher seems to answer us. I don't think she can really picture the idea that something invisible might be behind it. And I get that. It's a lot to take in. Whatever is behind it doesn't act constantly. It only seems to respond when there's a reason. Sometimes the energy feels light, almost humorous, so I wonder if different beings or guides step in at different times. But most of the time, the main presence feels strict, focused, and protective. Not scary, more like a teacher who isn't here to entertain me, but to help me grow. It becomes more active when I meditate, pray, sit quietly, or set a strong intention. It seems to guide me toward what I'm doing right and what I need to change. But if I ask it directly to perform or answer on command, nothing happens. Absolutely nothing. It only responds when it fits its purpose. And because not everyone understands this kind of thing, I doubted myself for years. I kept thinking, maybe I'm imagining it. Maybe I'm making connections that aren't really there. But the timing, the consistency, and the subtle way it responds over and over again made it harder and harder to dismiss. When I combine that with other experiences I've had, it becomes a much bigger picture. One of my favorite experiences was with an LED lamp. That's a whole different story, but somehow it became another kind of answering medium. It reacted for years through different moods, energies, and what felt like different spirits. It was honestly one of the strangest and most fascinating things I've ever lived through. I've always been sensitive to atmosphere and energy. Over time, I've learned enough about the way this communication happens to feel confident saying this. I believe it can read what I write. I believe it knows my thoughts, and maybe much more than I can even understand from where I am. Even saying that gives me this strange déjà vu feeling, like part of me is wondering if I'll wake up and forget all of this, like it was just a dream. But I hope not. This seems to be how my guides show up for me. I don't meditate as much as I should, and I feel like I lost some of that clearer connection because of it. Still, the whole thing frustrates me. I'm deeply drawn to the idea of contacting intelligent, independent spirits, guides, or whatever name fits best. And I'm thankful. Truly thankful. Whatever is guiding me seems to want me to evolve. It becomes stronger when I do the right things. When I sit down, pray, meditate, begin plans, or speak intentions from a real place. I think technology may play a much bigger role in spiritual communication than people realize. Not just through machines, but through the way our own minds interact with energy, attention, and whatever exists beyond ordinary perception. The future could be very bright in that esoteric kind of light. I've studied a little quantum theory, anthropology, and spiritual traditions, and every time I experiment, I come to new ideas and conclusions. I'm not claiming to have all the answers. I'm just sharing what I've lived, what I've noticed, and what I can no longer ignore. So, to whoever is listening, thank you for being here. Thank you for reading. Thank you for existing. You are eternal. You are powerful beyond what you remember. And maybe that's part of the whole mystery, that we forget so we can rediscover it again. Everything you've lost may still be waiting for you somewhere, ready to be found, released, and found again. May you become rich in spirit, rich in love, and rich in the hidden dreams you barely dare to speak out loud. Amen. Love, blessings, and greetings from me and my guide. I still think about this sometimes, even though it happened nearly 14 years ago. I was 17 then, and honestly, I spent more time at my girlfriend's house than I did at my own. Things at home were complicated, and her family knew that, so they were kind enough to let me be around whenever I needed somewhere quiet to exist for a while. My girlfriend, Leah, lived with her parents and her little sister in this old rectory that had been turned into a family home. It had that heavy, settled feeling older houses sometimes have, where every floorboard seems to remember more than it should. One afternoon, Leah had gone out for a driving lesson before her test. Her parents were at work, her sister was out, and they told me I could stay at the house until everyone got back. So I was upstairs in Leah's room, trying to get through some homework, when I heard this huge bang above me. Not a little creak, not a pipe knocking, a proper, violent bang. Right after it, there was this dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the floor in her parents' bedroom. My first thought was that the dog must have knocked something over. That seemed reasonable enough. So I stepped out of the room and looked downstairs. And there were the dog and the cat, both fast asleep together in the sitting room. That was when my stomach dropped a little. I didn't want to overreact, so I called the dog over, thinking, "Fine, we'll go check together." He came to the bottom of the stairs, looked up, then just sat down. He would not move. That was the strangest part at first, because his bed was actually in Leah's parents' room. He went up there all the time. But that day, he planted himself at the foot of the stairs, like he knew something I didn't. I stood there for a while, trying to talk myself into being brave. Eventually, I went up alone. The entrance to the attic was through Leah's parents' bedroom, and that attic door was usually shut. I had never seen it open casually. But when I walked into the room, it was wide open. I remember my knees shaking. I kept telling myself there had to be a normal explanation. Old houses move, wood expands, things fall, sounds travel strangely. So I checked the attic. I looked everywhere I could think to look. There was no one there, no animal. Nothing tipped over, nothing dragged across the floor, nothing that explained the bang, or that horrible, scraping sound. After a few minutes, I started feeling silly. I told myself I had probably made it bigger in my head than it really was. So I turned around and walked back toward the bedroom door. I left the attic door open behind me. Just as I reached the doorway to leave the room, the attic door slammed shut behind me, hard, not gently, not like a draft had caught it. It slammed like someone had thrown it shut with both hands. I didn't go back to check. I ran downstairs faster than I'd ever moved in that house and stayed in the sitting room with the dog and cat until Leah came home. I never told her about it. She hated anything to do with ghosts or strange things, and I didn't want to scare her in her own home. But later that evening, I told her mom. She didn't laugh. She didn't brush it off. She just looked at me very seriously and said, "There have been a lot of odd things in this house." Then she told me something that made the whole thing sit even colder in my chest. That attic door was normally kept locked. I experienced a few strange things in that house over the time I stayed there, but that was the one that stayed with me. Leah and I broke up later when we both went off to university. Nothing dramatic. We were young, and we both wanted to figure out who we were on our own. About a year after that, her family moved out of the rectory too. I've never said for certain that what happened was paranormal. Maybe there's some ordinary explanation I missed. Maybe the lock wasn't working properly. Maybe the house shifted in exactly the wrong way at exactly the wrong moment. But I know what I heard. I know what I saw. And after all these years, I still don't really know what happened in that room. I was about 10 years old when this happened, maybe a little younger. My family and I were living in a quiet, rural neighborhood at the time, a couple of hours away from the city we used to call home. The place we lived in was a rented townhouse, and the whole back wall of the dining area was basically one big sliding glass door. It opened out into a shared backyard, the kind where you could see the neighbor's patio furniture and the slope of the hill beyond it. One evening, I was sitting at the dining table painting. My back was turned to the glass door. My mom was upstairs in her bedroom, and my brother was in his room too. It was getting dark, but there was still enough light outside that I could see faint reflections in this shiny bowl sitting on the table. I remember everything feeling normal at first. I had been painting for maybe 15 minutes when, all of a sudden, something inside me told me to stop. Not in words. Just this heavy feeling, like my body noticed something before my mind did. The house was completely silent, which was strange because my family was never quiet. There was always some kind of noise, someone talking, footsteps, a TV somewhere. But in that moment, it felt like the whole house was holding its breath. I looked down at my painting again, trying to ignore it, and then this cold feeling ran straight down my back. I lifted my eyes to the reflection in the bowl. Behind me, outside the glass door, there was a tall, black figure. It was so tall it nearly reached the top of the door. It looked like it was wearing something long, maybe a robe or a dress, but I couldn't see a face or hands or any details. Just darkness. A person-shaped darkness. And then, it moved. It crossed the glass door incredibly fast, faster than anyone should have been able to move. The whole thing lasted maybe 2 or 3 seconds, but it was enough. My legs reacted before I even understood what I'd seen. I ran upstairs as fast as I could. My mom saw me and immediately asked what was wrong. I was trying to explain it, but I know I was probably barely making sense. I was scared, out of breath, stumbling over every sentence. The thing is, my mom has never been the kind of person to laugh off things like that. She grew up hearing stories from my grandma and my aunts about the apartment they used to live in, a place they always said was haunted. So when I told her, she listened. I think what really convinced her, though, was how terrified I was. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. She told me not to worry, and eventually helped me calm down enough to go to bed. The next morning, she went outside and found the patio table flipped over, along with the big umbrella attached to it. Not tipped a little, fully knocked over onto the ground. There hadn't been any wind that night, and that table was heavy. The kind of heavy where one person could not casually move it, let alone throw it over. About a week later, something else happened. I woke up in the middle of the night really thirsty. Everyone was asleep, and I didn't want to wake anybody, so I went downstairs quietly to get a glass of water. The only light on was the little glow from the oven clock. The kitchen was right next to the sliding glass door, separated by just a short wall, and it also had a window that faced the backyard. As soon as I stepped into the kitchen, I froze. Behind the blinds on that window, I saw what I thought were shadows from tree branches. But the longer I looked, the less it looked like branches. It looked like a hand. A huge, thin hand with fingers that were way too long. Then it started tapping on the window. Not softly, not in a way I could pretend I imagined. I heard it clearly. Tap. 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 I didn't stay to figure it out. I ran straight back upstairs to my room and got into bed. I tried to explain it away. I really did. I kept telling myself it was a tree branch, or the wind, or my eyes playing tricks on me. But then I remembered something that made my stomach drop. There were no trees in the backyard. None. It was just flat ground, then the hill behind it. Not long after that, we moved back to our old house in the city. I never had another experience like that again. And honestly, maybe it helped that the house we moved back into had been built on old church grounds. I don't know. I still don't have a perfect explanation for what I saw. All I know is that when I think back on it, I can still remember that silence in the house, that shape in the reflection, and the sound of those long fingers tapping on the glass. That's my story. So I'll start from the beginning, because honestly, I still don't fully know what to make of all this. About 2 years ago, around July 2024, my best friend Lacey and I decided we were going to try and Ouija board. We've always done basically everything together, and at the time, sleepovers felt like they needed something extra. Something weird. Something memorable. The plan was for me to go to her house, but on the day we were supposed to do it, she completely forgot and ended up going to her stepmom's place in another city. I was really upset at first, because part of me thought maybe she had forgotten on purpose because she was scared and didn't actually want to go through with it. But then she invited me there anyway, so I got my brother to drive me over. I didn't bring up the Ouija board right away. I just kept it to myself. Later, we were sitting outside in the garden, and it eventually came up. I started telling her about the rules I'd read, the research I'd done, all the things people say you should and shouldn't do. While I was explaining it, we suddenly heard the rocks behind us move. Not just a little noise either. It sounded like someone had dragged them. We both froze. We tried to explain it away. We looked around, checked what could have caused it, tried to be rational about it, but there was nothing. No person, no animal, no obvious reason. And because we were already in that mindset, we took it as a sign, like, okay, maybe this is actually going to work. The next night, we were home alone, and we were completely set on doing it. We made the board ourselves and started the session. There was a whole other strange thing that happened that night, but I'm not going to get into that right now because that's a story on its own. The part where things really started to feel wrong was in January 2025. Lacey and I decided to try it again. This time, I attempted to record it, but nothing happened while the camera was on. The second I stopped recording, that's when it started working. We ended up talking to something that was pretending to be a child. I don't know how else to describe it. It just felt off. I called it out, immediately got scared, and ended the session as fast as I could. I told Lacey I did not want to stay in that room anymore. Not for another second. So we went upstairs and talked through what had just happened. About 30 minutes later, she wanted to get a drink, so we worked up the courage to go back downstairs. That's when we noticed the photos. Every picture on the wall facing the room we had used was tilted sideways. Every single one. And the only photo with Lacey in it was broken. After that, somehow, we just carried on. We kept hanging out. We tried to forget about it. I think sometimes your brain just puts things in a little locked drawer because it doesn't know what else to do with them. The thing is, Lacey and I are incredibly close. I don't mean just normal best friends. It's always felt like there's something tying us together, something deeper than friendship. She's my person. It's always been me and her. Then, this March, she had to move 10 hours away to live with her mom. I was devastated, obviously. It felt like someone had taken half my world and packed it into a car. While we were apart, something strange happened at her house. Lacey's older sister, who was actually the reason the whole Ouija board idea started in the first place, got locked outside from the inside. The only people home were her and Lacey. Whatever happened there, it didn't feel normal. Anyway, Lacey came back yesterday, and I spent the night at hers. We took her dog for a walk around our local park, and I ended up going on this whole rant about how much I'd missed her. It felt good to have her back, even for a little while. Then, while we were walking, I touched my backside. Don't even ask why. I just did. And I felt something that definitely had not been there before. A scratch. We started talking about everything again. The Ouija board, the sessions, the weird things that had happened, all of it. And the entire time, I was trying to figure out where this scratch could have come from. But I have no explanation. I'm sensitive to pain, so I would have felt it happen. I know I would have. But I didn't feel anything at all. And it's literally on my cheek, in a place where I can't explain accidentally scratching myself like that. I have a cropped photo of it. I just don't know how to add it here. So please, send hopes, prayers, rational explanations, anything. Because for the sake of my sanity, I really need this to make sense. I don't know exactly when this started, but I can still remember the first time I felt it. I was about 9 or 10 when my family moved into this old house, and from the very first night, something about that place felt off. I used to sleep with my bedroom door open, always had, but that first night, right as I was drifting off, I got this heavy feeling in my chest. It felt like someone was watching me. Not just a little nervous feeling, it was deep in my body, like every part of me suddenly knew I was not alone. So after that, I started sleeping with my door closed. As I got older, I told myself it was just a kid's imagination. A new house, shadows in the hallway, all of that. But even after we moved, even in my own apartment, even at someone else's place, I still kept closing bedroom doors at night. I could laugh about it, but I still did it. Every time I tried to leave one open, something in me just couldn't handle it. Then, years later, in 2024, I spent the night with someone I had just met. We were tired, the door stayed open, and I didn't want to make it weird by insisting it had to be shut. That night scared me in a way I still think about. I remember falling asleep, then suddenly waking up because I heard someone come into the room. There was this woman standing there in a white gown with long, messy black hair hanging down around her face. She started moving toward the bed slowly, inch by inch. And the worst part was, it felt like she was enjoying it. Like she knew I was terrified. She looked almost excited, almost hungry, like the fear itself was feeding her. She came closer and closer until she reached the edge of the bed. Then she just stood there, staring at me. And then, everything went black. The next morning, I woke up completely shaken. Then earlier this year, about 5 months ago, it happened again. I had just run a half marathon, then drove all the way home the same day. So by the time I got into bed with my girlfriend, I was exhausted, completely gone. The bedroom door was open, and as I started drifting off, I tried to ask her to close it. I remember trying so hard to get the words out, but I was too tired. My body gave up before my mouth could work. And then, I was back in it. This time, I saw my grandmother. She had passed away, and in real life, she had lived far away in Central America. I didn't see her much growing up. Life got busy, schedules got complicated, and honestly, I never made as much time for her as I should have. In the dream, or whatever it was, she was upset with me. She was telling me that my mother and I hadn't prayed for her in a long time, that we hadn't lit a candle, that we had forgotten her, and it felt so real. I could see every detail on her face, the wrinkles in her skin, the dry patches, the little marks, her dark brown eyes. It was so clear that, at first, I felt emotional. But then, something changed. This awful discomfort came over me. Suddenly, it didn't feel like my grandmother anymore. It felt like something was using her face. I turned my head fast, trying to break away from it. And then, something grabbed my arm. For one tiny second, I swear I saw that woman in white again. Then everything went black. When I woke up, my girlfriend was scared. She told me I had been talking in my sleep, laughing, gasping, and thrashing around so much that she thought she was having a nightmare too. But the sheets were twisted and thrown everywhere, so I really had been moving like that. I told her what I saw. I told her about the door thing, how this has followed me since I was a kid. Since that night, whenever I start falling asleep and the door is open, she gets up and closes it all the way for me. I think what she saw that night scared her too. I have bad dreams sometimes, but they are never as vivid as they are when the door is open. Maybe it's my own mind freaking me out because I'm breaking some old superstition. Maybe it's something deeper than that. Truthfully, I don't know. All I know is that when a door is open at night, something in me still feels watched. And I don't think I'll ever be comfortable sleeping that way. Most people think of Sai Kung as one of Hong Kong's gentler places. You know the picture already. Blue water, green hills, hiking paths, seafood places by the pier, families out on weekends, friends taking photos by the reservoirs. In the daytime, it feels peaceful, spacious, almost kind. But the thing about a place like that is, it can hold two faces at once. Because if you talk to people who grew up hearing the older stories, they'll tell you Sai Kung has another side too. A quieter side. A side that doesn't show itself until you're deep in the hills and the trees start pressing in. There's a local legend people sometimes call the Sai Kung Barrier, and the idea is frighteningly simple. Somewhere out in the mountains, there is a line you can't see. No sign, no fence, no warning. But once you step past it, the trail stops behaving like a trail. The way back no longer feels like the way back. Your phone loses signal. The same rocks, trees, and bends seem to repeat. And no matter how carefully you walk, it feels as if the mountain has gently, patiently, decided not to let you go. The legend became well known because of cases that were very real. One of the most talked about happened in September 2005. A 45-year-old off-duty police detective named Tong Lai Hua went hiking alone in Sai Kung. He wasn't careless, and he wasn't new to pressure. He was trained, fit, and used to difficult situations. That morning, he entered the hills near Pak Tam Chung with his backpack, expecting an ordinary hike. But sometime after noon, he called emergency services. He said he was lost. What unsettled people later was not just that he was lost. It was the way he tried to explain where he was. During the call, he kept repeating numbers. Things like Sai Kung 586, 487040, 487020, 587 something, and 024. The operator tried to understand what he meant. Were these numbers from a distance post? A sign? A marker on the trail? At first he seemed to think so. Then his answer changed. He said they weren't numbers on a post. He said they were codes. The call lasted only several minutes, but people who know the story always describe the same feeling around it. Confusion turning into fear. He sounded tired, disoriented, then frightened. Near the end, he kept asking for help. And then, the line cut off. After that, Tong Lai Hua was gone. The search that followed was huge. Police, firefighters, volunteers, helicopters, search dogs, mountain rescue teams. They combed through valleys, slopes, trails, and forested sections of Saikang. But they found nothing. No body, no backpack, no jacket, no gear. Not even one clear trace that could explain where he had gone. And that, to me, is the part that stays with you. Because when someone disappears, you expect the world to leave at least one thread behind. A footprint, a torn piece of fabric, something caught on a branch. But in this case, there was just silence. Only a few weeks later, another case added to the fear. A young man named Yim Chi Yuan, in his early 20s, was leading a small group through an outdoor route in Saikang. He had experience. He had been involved in scouting and outdoor training, and he was not the kind of person you'd imagine getting easily lost. During the hike, he began feeling unwell. He had taken cold medicine, and at some point, he told the others to continue ahead while he rested. He was supposed to catch up. He never did. When the others realized he was missing, they searched for him and called out his name. But the forest gave nothing back. A search began, and 2 days later, his body was found on a steep, heavily wooded slope. The official explanation was that he had likely fallen while trying to find his way. That explanation makes sense, but stories grow in the spaces where certainty is thin. A version that spread afterward claimed his body was found only a short distance beyond an area that had already been searched, even with dogs. Some people believe the trees, slope, and thick brush simply hid him from view. Others wonder if he had somehow crossed into that strange place people talk about. Years later, in 2016, another hiker became part of the legend. His name was Chung San Pak. He went hiking alone in Saikang and vanished for 4 days and 3 nights. But unlike the others, he came back alive. And what he described was deeply strange. He said he kept walking, but somehow he would return to the same pool of water again and again. He said he saw someone ahead of him, a hiker he thought he recognized, but every time he tried to get closer, the figure vanished between the trees. At one point, he saw what looked like a red brick building, maybe 2 or 3 stories high, standing behind the forest. But when he moved toward it, there was nothing there. He also said that after sleeping, the landscape seemed different. A waterfall that had been flowing one way now seemed to have changed direction. Some of his belongings disappeared too. Cigarettes, a lighter, even his hiking pole. And then there were the voices. He said he heard them coming from the rocks. Not just echoes, not just wind. He described conversations, quarrels, television sounds, the kind of noise you'd hear through the walls of an apartment building, as if every stone around him had a little room sealed inside it. Eventually, he followed a stream and found other hikers. He was rescued. Now, of course, there are practical explanations for all of this. Saikang is not a simple place once you leave the familiar paths. The trails split, valleys twist, the forest gets dense, phone signal can disappear. If you're tired, dehydrated, injured, or scared, your mind can start turning against you. A shadow becomes a person. Running water becomes voices. A similar bend in the trail becomes proof that you're walking in circles. That is all possible. But I think the reason this story lasts is not because everyone agrees it must be supernatural. It lasts because of what was never found. Tong Lai Hua never came home. His things never came home either. There was no final answer waiting at the end of the search. Just an empty space. and empty spaces have a way of breathing. So maybe the Sai Kung barrier is not a doorway or a curse or a hidden border between worlds. Maybe it is what happens when terrain, weather, fear, exhaustion, and bad luck all close around a person at once. Or maybe, deep in those green hills, there really is a line that looks like nothing at all. And once you cross it, the mountain remembers you differently. Hey there. I want to share something really personal with you. Something that shadowed my childhood from when I was about 5 years old until we moved when I was 10. It's the story of this lady ghost, or maybe a demon, that used to visit me every single night. I'm now 25 with 2 little girls of my own, and honestly, I still get chills thinking she might come after them too. I pray she never does. Back then, I did everything I could to feel safe. I'd pile stuffed animals all over myself, from head to toe, like a soft fortress. I'd even plug my ears, desperate to drown out whatever whisper or sound might be lurking. I could never fall asleep without my little lamp on, though it never really helped, but at least I could see a bit in the dark. So, picture this. I'm lying in bed, the soft glow of the lamp casting shadows on the walls, my heart pounding, trying desperately to drift off. Then, everything would suddenly go so quiet you could hear a pin drop. It was that silence that told me she was coming. About a minute later, she'd be right there, by the side of my bed. I could feel it before I even looked. I remember peeking out from under my mountain of stuffed animals, and there she was, floating there, staring at me with the most terrifying face. Her skin was so pale it looked almost translucent, and her eyes were haunting. I'd freak out, heart racing, and bolt straight to my mom and stepdad's room, jumping into bed with my mom, where I could finally find some peace and finally fall asleep. This happened night after night. I cried and begged my stepdad to let me keep my light on, and finally, one night, he gave in. But that night, it was worse. She slithered in like always, and I ran to my mom's room, but this time, my stepdad wasn't having it. He told me to go back to my room. I completely broke down. My mom had to convince him to let me sleep on the floor next to her bed, right up against the wall. I remember lying there, clutching my mom's hand, which was hanging over the side of the bed, trying to calm myself as I stared up at the ceiling fan slowly spinning. Then, the room went eerily silent again, that terrible quiet, and I thought, no way she can get to me here with Mom. But then I saw her. She was floating just at the foot of the bed, slowly drifting over to my side. She always wore this old white gown, and her long black hair hung like shadows around her face. And she moved with such unnatural silence. It was sickening. I was so terrified I screamed until my mom and stepdad jumped up, asking what was wrong. All I could say was, "She's trying to get me, Mom. She's trying to get me." That night, my mom let me sleep in her bed, and finally, I was okay. It's hard to explain just how much torment that lady put me through. I was always so exhausted during the day, dozing off in school because I hadn't slept at all. I begged to stay at my aunt's or grandmother's house, anywhere but home. One time, she even followed me to my aunt's place, and I ran outside and sat right in the middle of the street until my aunt got home at 7 in the morning. It was horrible. Even now, 20 years later, I'm a grown man with a family, and sometimes I lie awake at night, heart hammering, thinking about her. I worry she might find me again. I've had panic attacks, waking up from dreams where she's there, staring at me. Only 2 people know about her besides me, my wife and my mom. And now, anyone who reads this story will know too, even if some don't believe it. And this is just one of the nights I remember clearly. There are at least 10 more that haunt my memory. So that's my story. The lady in white who haunted my childhood. Thanks for listening. Hey, I want to share something pretty personal and a bit unusual that happened to me recently. And honestly, it's been on my mind a lot. But before I get into the experience itself, I should set the scene a little bit so you understand why this meant so much to me. Last year, around May, a boy named Jamie, someone I'd known since primary school and went through high school with, passed away. It was sudden and heartbreaking. He had gotten a cut on his foot, nothing that seemed serious at first, but then an infection took hold, spreading quickly and shutting down his body. It was devastating news for everyone who knew him. Jamie wasn't just another face in the crowd. He was part of our community, and even though I wasn't super close to him, his death hit me hard. I remember the funeral vividly. So many people gathered, the sky overcast, the air thick with grief and disbelief. For weeks after, I was just in this numb haze, trying to make sense of losing someone so unexpectedly. Now, fast forward to this afternoon, when something happened that I'm still trying to process. I had been asleep for a few hours and then woke up, but it wasn't like a normal awakening. It felt like sleep paralysis, you know? That terrifying moment when your body just won't move. But this time was different. I could talk, I could hear myself speaking, but I was completely frozen. My eyes were open, and right there, sitting at the end of my bed, was someone. I asked who it was, and the person slowly turned their head toward me. It was Jamie. I blinked a few times, trying to convince myself this wasn't some trick of the mind. But there he was, calm and kind, just playing with the laces of his shoes. We talked for a while, about school, about life, about things I'd been struggling with. He gave me advice like he had all the time in the world, and there was this warmth in his presence that made me feel safe, even though I was trapped in my own body. I asked him why he was here, and he smiled softly and said, "Just checking in. I do that quite often to make sure everyone's okay." Then he joked that it was easier to talk to people this way than when he was alive. Normally, sleep paralysis is terrifying for me. There's this weight of dread, a feeling like something's watching. But this moment was different. It felt real. Like a genuine conversation I might have had with Jamie if he were still here. After we finished talking, he reached out and gently touched my hand. His voice was soft but steady, and he said, "My time here with you is over, but I'll make sure to let you know if I come around again. I'll look out for you." It struck me because those were some of the last words he said to me before he passed. Then, just like that, he vanished right in front of my eyes. As soon as he disappeared, the paralysis lifted. I was able to move again and sat up in bed, feeling completely awake. It wasn't that groggy, disoriented awakening I usually get after sleep paralysis. It was like I'd just been gently brought back from somewhere else. I've always believed in the paranormal, in the idea that there's a physical world and a spiritual world. This invisible realm where souls go when they pass on. Sometimes I think spirits get caught in between, in this limbo where they can cross over or reach out. But I'd never heard of something quite like this. An actual visit during sleep paralysis, a moment of connection that felt so real and comforting. So I guess my question is, can spirits really manifest themselves like this? Can they just pop in for visits and chats, especially in moments when our minds and bodies are somewhere between waking and sleeping? Because that's exactly what it felt like to me. A visit from Jamie, checking in, reminding me I'm not alone. And honestly, knowing that has brought me a little peace. Hey there, I want to share some stories that have been part of my life, experiences that might seem unbelievable, but have shaped a lot of my perspective. Let's start with a story from when I was just a little kid, around 5 years old. I lived in Hawaii back then with my parents and my younger sister. My dad was stationed there with the military, so that's why we were there. Now, I don't remember the very beginning of this myself. It's something my mom told me much later, but it's important. We had this little closet under the stairs, kind of like something out of a Harry Potter story. My sister and I would play in there all the time. I remember the closet vividly, but what I didn't know was that I used to talk to someone in there who wasn't my sister. My mom told me I'd be in there, chatting away with a little girl. When she asked who it was, I said it was a friend, a little girl. At the time, I thought it was just an imaginary friend, but now, I'm pretty sure she wasn't imaginary. Eventually, we moved from Hawaii to where we live now, and it seems the little girl came with us. We lived in 3 different homes here, and strange things happened at each one. At our first house here, my aunt came over one day when no one was home. Later, she asked my mom why I was home from school that day, but I had gone to school as usual. My aunt said she'd seen a little girl with 2 braids staring out our window, resting her chin on her hands. She said the girl looked a lot like me, which confused us because I wasn't there. That's the only experience from that home I really remember. Then, we moved into my grandparents' old house. They had been experiencing odd things there, and Grandma even gave the name Hank to the spirit they felt was around. When we moved in, we started noticing things going missing or being moved. My mom also heard a little girl's voice calling Mommy sometimes, a voice she knew wasn't mine or my sister's. So we had 2 different spirits, the little girl and Hank. Hank liked to move our stuff around, and sometimes when something went missing, we'd scold him and ask for it back. It was almost like a game. Hank was mostly harmless, but there were 2 times when he got angry. One night, my dad was drunk and yelling at Hank to stop messing with our things. Suddenly, a light bulb exploded right above us, shattering glass all over the living room. Another time, Grandma was visiting and talking about calling someone to get rid of Hank, and without warning, a pitcher fell off a shelf right behind her, nearly hitting her. That was pretty scary. Hank stuck with us when we moved into our current house, and my mom told him to look after the little girl spirit that had been following me since Hawaii. I heard the little girl's voice clearly once, saying, "Mommy," in the hallway near the bedrooms. It wasn't scary, more like a soft presence. There were other times I felt scared in the house, especially in my own room and the attic, which I was always afraid of. The attic was reachable through a door in my closet ceiling, which just added to the creepiness. One night, my dad checked on me while I was sleeping and saw someone crouched on my bed behind my legs, a figure with knees pulled to the chest, but when he looked again, it was gone. Another time, I was alone in my parents' room, sitting in the computer chair, and suddenly, the chair jerked forward like someone pushed it. Once, while lying in bed on my right side, I felt a hand slide under my pillow from behind me. I was too scared to look back. Another time, while crying on the living room couch because of hip pain, I heard a little girl's voice comforting me, saying, "It's okay." I wasn't scared at all then. One evening, while watching TV on the couch, I saw a white figure with its head bent down move down the hallway from my room toward my parents' bedroom. It was all very surreal. Even though it's confusing and scattered, those are the paranormal experiences I had growing up. Since moving out, I haven't felt that presence anymore. I think the little girl stayed with my parents, along with Hank and other spirits. Now, on a different note, I want to talk about sleep paralysis and the strange shadow people that sometimes come with it. I've had these episodes a few times a year. When I was younger, I'd freeze and try to fight back, but it felt like my fists slid off their faces, like I was hitting something slippery. The trick to breaking free is to change the way you fight, like switching from a straight punch to a back fist. It throws them off. It's like pushing against two magnets with the same pull. It takes a lot of strength to pull away. These shadow people can take on any shape, not just shadows. Sometimes they appear as dead loved ones, trying to get a reaction from you, feeding on your emotions. Before the paralysis hits, if you're awake, you might feel a warm wind brush over you. Then the figure tries to hold you down or bear hug you, which is terrifying, but they feed off your fear. One time, during one of these episodes, I got so angry that my hands started to burn with blue flames. The shadow creature screeched and fled out the door. The flames spread all over me, but I wasn't hurt. Instead of freaking out, I chased it out and bear hugged it until it stopped screaming. Now, when they attack in dreams, I try to grab their arm or throat and burn them away. These days, they come in groups, never alone, and their screams sound like a small dinosaur from old movies. There was this one dream where I was asleep on my back and felt one come straight through the bottom of my bed. It grabbed me, and we wrestled until I choked it from behind and then went for the throat burn. Suddenly, my dead mom appeared, shaking and screaming, transforming into one of those shadow creatures. I threw the first one into the other and told them both to leave, and the dream ended. It's important to remember that sometimes the shadow people mimic loved ones to feed off your emotions, but it's not really them. Fighting back and staying calm is key. Moving on to something a bit more out there, I've had a few UFO encounters over the years. When I was about 11, I was driving home with my dad and saw this massive black ship with multiple spires, looking like a tiny city floating in the sky. I pointed it out to my dad, and he saw it too, but then he freaked out and started screaming that nothing was there, even though he'd just described it. It was bizarre. More recently, about 4 years ago, while working at a hotel during a Veterans Day parade, a housekeeper pointed out a white sphere in the sky. It moved incredibly fast, then split into 6 smaller spheres. I told her it was probably just observing, but later when I asked about any strange sightings, she completely denied seeing anything, like her mind couldn't handle it. Another time, I let my dogs out at night and noticed a star larger than the others. It got closer, and I realized it was a 4-pointed star with smaller points around it, about the size of a pressure cooker, pulsing different colors. I tried telepathy, asking if it meant harm, if it came from the stars, and if it was on a recon mission. The star responded with colors: red for no harm, green for yes it came from stars, and green again for recon. Then it flew away. The key was staying calm to remember everything clearly. No missing time or strange marks afterward, just a weird encounter. Now, I want to share some strange encounters with black-eyed kids, or BEKs. I work downtown at a hotel, and I've had 2 encounters. One was on my way to the bus stop, about 8 blocks from work. I was waiting at a crosswalk and noticed a teenage girl staring at me from across the street. She looked normal, except her eyes were completely black. No whites, just black. When she realized I was looking, she panicked and ran away as soon as the light turned green, which was odd because usually BEKs don't panic like that. I regret not following her. The other time was at work. A female guest in gym clothes asked for my help and made small talk. Her pupils were strange, shifting and moving like a lava lamp, but only the black part. It was unsettling but not scary. I Googled it but found nothing that matched. It made me wonder if there are different kinds of BEKs or similar entities. Now, let me tell you about one of the scariest experiences I've had, being trapped in a lucid nightmare. Usually, my lucid dreams are fun, but this one was terrifying. I woke up in my room, but everything was dark and twisted. I knew I was dreaming, so I counted my fingers to check, but as soon as I finished, my hands disappeared. My body felt slow and sick, like I was ancient and weak. I tried to wake myself up by closing my eyes and tensing my body, like I'd done before, But this time, it didn't work. I started to panic, pacing around my room, even throwing myself down the stairs, but nothing woke me. Something was next to me, but I was too scared to look. Then it climbed on my back, small, heavy, like a child or a little animal. Somehow, I managed to get free and paced out of my room. I tried throwing myself down the stairs again, still no luck. Time felt endless. I started thinking, what if this isn't a dream? What if I actually died and woke up in some messed up alternate reality? I noticed new doors in my room leading to strange corridors, but I didn't want to explore. Then I started choking on something, probably my spit, but I could still breathe. It was uncomfortable, and I worried I might choke for real. I even tried to ask for help on a subreddit, but my phone wouldn't turn on. Eventually, I woke up for real. It was 2 a.m., and I was too shaken to sleep again. Lastly, I want to share a story about my time as the singer in a punk metal band called Scotch Tapeworm. We never made it big, but had some local gigs, and even opened for some big names. We were excited about a new song, Spent and Deflated, and made a music video, promoting it online. But then, out of nowhere, copyright claims started flooding in from some unknown shell company, taking down our videos and killing our momentum. One night, I got a strange comment on a private video, just "so good," and a link to a number. I called it and talked to a woman named Eve, who said her family owned a studio and wanted to collaborate. Despite misgivings, I met her at a cafe, and she showed me their brand new studio in a house deep in the woods at 65 Hatchet Lane, a place that seemed almost too perfect, too new. She asked me to sing in the studio, but after a while, the door locked, and I was trapped underground with no phone signal. I was stuck for hours, scared and pacing, before I saw a dozen shadowy figures with glowing red eyes watching me from the control room. They demanded I sing, but the fear made it impossible. After several tries, I finally screamed the song with all my might. They approved, but then, a tall, clawed figure dragged me out into the woods, its face like a beak, mouth foul and toothless. I fought but blacked out. I woke up the next day on the side of the highway, bruised and coughing, with no memory of how I got there. The police couldn't find the address or the woman. Since then, I've lost my voice. It crackles and coughs, and I can't sing or find a rhythm. It's like my music was stolen. I don't know what happened, but if anyone has answers, I'd be grateful. And one more weird but true story. Last June, I found a strange yard sale in a fancy neighborhood, unusual for the area. 2 men were selling all kinds of old things, including a massive collection of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle toys and memorabilia from a girl named Christy. The whole lot was only $100, so I bought it all, including a handmade TMNT Ouija board. I set up the toys and lights at home and invited friends over. We joked around with the Ouija board, but when we asked why it was made, the planchette spelled out, "Later, dude," a goodbye. That night, strange things started happening. Toys falling, shelves crashing, and my dog Arnie acting terrified. I found black goo leaking in the basement, and when I checked the toys, they were all scattered, facing away from me, with Donatello missing. Then, a small black goo-covered childlike figure appeared, picking up Donatello. Its face cracked to reveal a horrifying plastic jaw with a black void inside. It reached for me, but Arnie barked fiercely, and suddenly, the lights came back on. The creature vanished, leaving only fading footprints. I learned that Christy was a girl who died young from a rare disease, and this was her family's house, flooded recently. Her ashes mixed with the rainwater to create the black goo. I don't know what to make of all this, but I think there's more to these stories than I can explain. Thanks for listening to all these tales. Some scary, some strange, but all part of my journey. If you've had similar experiences or have any insight, I'd love to hear from you. My twin brother and we've had some pretty strange experiences growing up. And there's this one thing that always kind of slipped my mind until recently. Probably because we were so little when it happened. But it was almost like a daily thing for us from when we were about 4 years old until around 9. Yeah, it was that frequent. So picture this. 2 little kids, identical twins, running around and suddenly catching these shadowy figures darting just at the edge of their vision. Not just once or twice, but all the time. It wasn't like a scary ghost story. It was just there. Shadow people, if you will, flitting by in the corners of our eyes. And honestly, I never thought I'd even talk about it because, weirdly enough, it never really bothered me. I actually believe there's more to this world, maybe another dimension or something. And if you don't believe in that, well, I think you might be missing out on some truths. We were raised in a pretty Christian household, so every time my brother, let's call him Liam, and I told our mom about these shadows, she had this steady response. She'd say, "If it doesn't scare you, it's a good spirit. If it does scare you, just rebuke it in the name of Christ." I can still hear her voice, calm but firm. And the funny thing? She had to come up with all these explanations to comfort us, poor woman, because these dark figures kept appearing to us so often. It got to the point where I'd actually avoid looking at certain darker corners in the house or shadowy spots outside. I'd try to keep those creepier parts of the house out of my peripheral vision because, honestly, I hated seeing those shadows run by. And when I did catch one, I'd be frustrated, thinking, "See? I knew it was there." Liam felt the same way. We both thought we'd be seeing these shadow figures forever. But strangely, we don't see them anymore. Not at all. Sometimes, when we experiment with psychedelics like LSD as adults, we get those trippy shadow shapes again. But it's nothing like what we saw as kids. Those childhood shadows weren't some colorful, swirling illusions. They looked like actual dark legs and arms moving swiftly just out of our direct sight. There were times when we'd see the shadows one right after the other, without knowing the other had just seen one. Then later we'd compare notes, and it was eerie how similar our sightings were. One time stands out in my mind. I ran to my mom, heart pounding, saying, "Mom, I saw one again." This one actually scared me. It was the usual kind, just at the edge of my vision, but it felt different that day. Meanwhile, Liam was sitting by the fireplace all alone, completely unaware I'd just told Mom about my sighting. He felt this uneasy chill and glanced to his left, where he saw a massive shadow sitting right next to him. At first, he thought it was just his own shadow from the firelight, so he shifted his body down, expecting the shadow to move too. But no, the shadow went the opposite direction. Then he leaned back the other way, but the shadow stayed still. He got really freaked out, jumped up, and sprinted straight to Mom. I never doubted his story because I'd experienced the same things, and because he ran to Mom moments after I did, but from a completely different spot in the house. I can only imagine how overwhelmed she must have felt dealing with us both. Years later, as an adult, I brought up those memories with our mom. She got this wide-eyed look and said, "Yeah, that stuff was really scary." Turns out, all that talk about good spirits and bad spirits was just something she told us to keep us calm. She admitted she was terrified herself and didn't know what else to say to her creepy little twins. So, that's our story. Shadow people running by in the corners of our eyes, haunting our childhood, but never hurting us. It's a strange memory, but it's ours. And maybe, just maybe, there's more out there than what we can see. You know, I want to share with you some stories from my family farm out in the rural Midwest. It's a place that's been in our family for over a century, and it holds so much history, love, and, well, some really mysterious moments too. My grandma and grandpa still live there, And my grandpa, actually, was born right on that land, just like his father before him. The farm has this deep, grounded feeling, but over the past decade or so, strange things have happened that are hard to explain, and I want to tell you about them. So, picture the homestead. It's got 2 houses nestled just a stone's throw apart, maybe about 25 yards or so. The newer, smaller house is where my grandparents raised their family. It was built by my grandpa when he married my grandma. It's cozy, filled with the sounds of everyday life, but just a short walk away, there's this much older, bigger house. That's where my grandpa was born and grew up, and before him, my great-grandpa Corwin lived there too. My mom used to tell me about taking dinner over to my great-grandparents every evening, especially after my great-grandma passed away. Great-grandpa Corwin was living alone then, and my mom would bring him food and company. Corwin was one of the kindest souls I've ever known. He had this gentle way about him, always ready to pause and talk with anyone who stopped by. I remember visiting the farm as a kid, and he'd always have those little wafer cookies waiting for us, a sweet treat that somehow made the old house feel warmer. Corwin was active well into his 90s, still roaming the farm with his cane in one hand and a handkerchief in the other. It was like he belonged to that land, like the farm was part of him, and he was part of it. Eventually, he moved to a nursing home in a nearby town, and he passed away peacefully at 94. But here's where things start to get a little eerie. Not long after Corwin died, my grandpa began to hear something strange. He thought he heard his dad calling his name, faint and distant, just like when he was alive. I read somewhere that it's actually pretty common to hear a loved one's voice after they pass, but still, it unsettled him. And then, my grandpa started noticing lights flicking on and off in that old house when no one was supposed to be there. One of my uncles, who's about as skeptical as they come, even decided to live in that old house for a while after Corwin's passing. He didn't believe in ghosts or anything supernatural, but he couldn't deny the strange noises he kept hearing. Creaks, footsteps, whispers. One night, he was jolted awake by a loud bang. Heart racing, he grabbed his pistol and went to check it out. Turns out, it was just a basketball that had fallen from a high shelf, but still, it gave him a scare. Sometimes he wonders if it could have been Corwin's way of saying hello. But maybe the most chilling tales come from my grandma and another uncle. Both of them have seen something that made their skin crawl. You know how Corwin loved to wander the farm, checking on things, even into his old age? Well, on separate occasions, my grandma and this uncle saw a man walking around outside at night, dressed just like Corwin always did, overalls and a flannel shirt, the classic farmer's outfit. Seeing him out there in the dark was frightening, and neither of them told anyone at first, thinking maybe their eyes were playing tricks. Eventually, my uncle mentioned it to my grandparents, and my grandma was shocked because she had seen the same figure. They talked it over and agreed it was probably Corwin, still roaming the land he loved. But they were both puzzled. Why would it be so scary if it was him? Maybe it was just the surprise of seeing someone familiar where they didn't expect, especially at night, when shadows stretch long and everything feels different. A few years back, I got curious and explored that old house myself, though I won't lie, it's getting pretty dangerous inside. The floors creak and groan, and the air feels heavy, like it's holding its breath. I even set up a recorder to capture any sounds for 24 hours, but honestly, I never worked up the courage to listen to what it picked up. Maybe part of me is afraid of what I might hear. But you know, there's something comforting about thinking that maybe it's just my great-grandpa Corwin, still hanging out on the farm, the only home he ever really knew. You know, I spent a lot of my childhood winters with my grandmother up in northern Sweden. She lived with her two sisters just outside this tiny little town in a place locals call Blue Hills, or Blåkulla in Swedish. Their house was small, gray, and pretty simple. They had electricity, but only at night, and their heat came from an old furnace that crackled and hummed all winter long. During the day, the Blue Hills were peaceful, almost silent, the kind of quiet where you could swear you heard the snow slowly melting beneath your feet. But at night? Man, at night it turned into this vast, endless field of white fading into pitch-black darkness. It was breathtaking and terrifying all at once, the kind of place that gets under your skin and stays there. I remember this one night when I was about 7. Grandma took me ice fishing, just the two of us out there on the frozen lake. I was sitting there with a hot dog in my hand, staring up at the sky, just soaking it all in. And then I saw it. A star brighter than any other, twinkling like a little green flame. "That's the green star," Grandma whispered, her voice soft and serious. "It only shows up in special places way up north, and only people with special hearts can see it. But be careful, don't stare at it too long, or it'll turn the snow green. And if it blinks 3 times, misfortune will find you." I was just a kid, so I didn't really believe it, but I listened anyway. She handed me an old cast iron key, some sort of good luck charm to keep with me. Still, all I wanted to do was keep watching that green star flicker in the night sky. There was something magical about it, something I couldn't explain. Years went by, and life got busy. School, girlfriends, sports, you know how it is. I stopped going up north in the winter. But then Grandma got sick. We made one last trip to see her. She was as cheerful as ever, even as her health faded. She passed away in that same little gray house, the same month as her sisters. We scattered their ashes on the lake, and the green star still shone above. After college and starting my career, I got engaged to my girlfriend, Samantha, Sam to her friends. We planned a big trip to Barcelona for our 5th anniversary, but then the pandemic hit and everything changed. We had to scrap our plans. We thought about getting diving certificates, but with all the restrictions, that was out. Instead, Sam found this cozy lodge up north where we could go winter camping, just the two of us. We managed to get a long weekend off work, 3 days in a small cabin surrounded by snow and silence. It wasn't Blåkulla, but it felt like a little piece of home. A few days before we left, Sam had to go on a business trip out of town. She took COVID tests before and after, but on her way back, she tested positive. She called me early in the morning, her voice worried. "I don't want you to get sick," she said softly. "You should go on your own. I know how much you've been looking forward to this. I'm sorry." We talked it over, and she convinced me it was best. She'd isolate at home, and I'd head up north alone. It felt strange leaving without her, but I also felt a little comforted, like Grandma was watching over me. Driving away from the city, I sang old songs Grandma had taught me, stealing glances at the night sky. The stars grew brighter as I left the city lights behind, twinkling like diamonds scattered across black velvet. And there it was, the green star, hidden among the constellations, just like I remembered. The trek from where I parked to the lodge was brutal, about a 35-minute hike through snow that swallowed me up to my knees. With only a flashlight to light my way, the path felt narrow and fragile beneath my feet. Every crunch of snow underfoot echoed loudly in the silence. I questioned myself constantly. Was I going the right way? What if I got lost out here all alone? The cold bit through my layers, and the wind whispered through the pines, carrying an eerie melody that made my skin crawl. Eventually, I found the lodge. It was small, with 2 rooms, 4 beds, and a tiny kitchen. No power inside, but a diesel generator hummed outside, and the furnace filled the rooms with warmth. The lodge sat atop a little hill clearing, surrounded by endless woods, and the view stretched for miles. Even if there were 100 places like this, I'd never find them all. I settled in, brewed some coffee, sliced up a salami, and sat outside on a folding chair. The stars were so bright here, so alive compared to the dull glow of city skies. It felt like coming home after a long journey. And there, shining softly, was the green star. It was subtle, but unmistakable. I couldn't look away. It pulled me back to that night on the ice with Grandma, to wonder and magic. I whispered, "You're still here, Grandma." Then, suddenly, the star blinked out. Panic fluttered in my chest. I scanned the sky, searching until I found it again, faint but still there. My heart raced. Was it real, or just a trick of the cold night? Either way, I sat there for hours, coffee cooling in my cup, salami slowly freezing, lost in the quiet and the stars. Sleep didn't come easy. Without the hum of city life, the distant cars, the buzz of electronics, the steady breathing of someone beside me, I became hyper-aware of every creak and rustle. The pine trees swayed, their branches tapping and groaning in the wind. I lay awake, senses sharpened, feeling like something unseen was watching me. The next day, I decided to walk to a nearby frozen lake. I packed my gear, including an ice auger and fishing rods, and called Sam a few times, but no answer. I promised myself I'd try again later. Walking on ice alone isn't the smartest choice, but I'd done it plenty before, so I figured I'd be fine. Drilling through the thick ice took hours, but eventually, I set up 2 baited rods and settled in with a thermos of coffee and an audiobook. The world shrank to the rhythm of the story and the gentle tap of the rods. No fish came, but I was at peace, even if a hollow feeling gnawed at me. Maybe it was missing Sam, or maybe something else. As dusk settled, I finally caught a fish. I cleaned it quickly and packed up, ready to head back. But then, a sharp snap sounded beneath me. My heart jumped as I froze in place. Another crack. The ice was thick, but the sound of breaking ice beneath your feet is unmistakable. I dropped flat, spreading my weight, and began crawling carefully toward shore, my breath shallow and rapid. I made it back, leaving some gear behind. As I stood catching my breath, the ice behind me gave way with a thunderous crack, swallowing my fishing rods and the fish into a perfect, unnaturally round hole. That night, on my way back to the lodge, a nearby pine tree suddenly snapped and crashed mere feet from me. If I hadn't stopped to check my phone, it might have hit me. The forest seemed alive with unsettling sounds, twigs snapping, branches scraping, turning the once comforting wind into something sinister. I brewed another pot of coffee and nibbled the last of my salami, but every bite felt like a distraction from the creeping dread. The night sky was brighter than ever. The green star blazed above me, impossible to ignore. It burned through my eyelids, forcing me to shield my eyes with a trembling hand. It grew larger, closer, until it was as big as my fist, pulsing with a living, breathing energy. The light washed over the hillside in a thick green glow that seemed to thicken the air itself. I could almost taste it, a metallic tang that made my skin crawl. Then I saw them. At the edge of the forest, bathed in that eerie green light, stood creatures, deer, hares, foxes, and even some farm animals like chickens, cows, and dogs. Behind them, people. Broken, naked, pale as ice or torn beyond recognition. One figure caught my eye, a young woman with a broken neck, her body ravaged by time and decay, her eyes a haunting winter green. They all watched me, silent and still, shadows in the glow. My hands trembled as I wrapped my fingers around my car keys, desperate to ground myself. Panic and disbelief tangled inside me. I didn't know whether to run or stay. The warmth from the star was real, but so was the fear gripping my chest. I turned to flee, and then she was there. The woman with the broken neck, as if the forest had moved closer. The green light intensified, and the silhouettes closed in, hollow-eyed and silent. I backed against the lodge wall, heart pounding, hands scratching at the rough wood like a trapped animal. My nails tore and bent, blood mixing with dirt. I screamed, a raw, desperate sound that felt more like a plea. Cold fingers brushed my leg, and tears blurred my vision. I hid behind them, hoping they'd shield me from the nightmare unfolding. Then, something small and cool landed in my hand. A cast iron key. The same one Grandma had given me all those years ago. Clutching it tight, a wave of calm washed over me. I curled into a fetal position in the snow, crying until my eyes burned raw and red. I knew I'd never see the stars the same way again. The next morning, numb and drained, I packed up and left. Not everyone can see the green star. Sam never has, and even folks from up north don't always spot it. Like Grandma said, it takes a special place and special people. If you ever catch a glimpse of it, don't stare too long. Question what you see. Force yourself to look away now and then. I made it home to Sam, but I'm still not sure how to tell her what happened. Maybe I never will. Because what I saw, it's not something I want to see again. You know, it all started when I lost my job right at the beginning of the pandemic. Suddenly, I had all this time on my hands, and I found myself spending more and more hours online. I fell down some pretty wild rabbit holes. Remember those? Like, I spent an entire weekend watching videos about flat Earth theories. Yeah, I know, it sounds nuts. But honestly, I rode into almost every conspiracy forum you could imagine. I'm pretty sure I made it onto some government watch list by the end of it. When I finally got a new job, I tried to leave all that behind. But I did keep in touch with a few friends I'd made during those days. Most of them weren't the crazed types you might picture. They were just curious people, skeptics really. They weren't obsessed with wild theories just for drama's sake. They were fascinated by how things worked, always poking around for answers. Kind of like me. As I cleaned up the mess from my unemployed, anxious days, I noticed a new trend was sweeping through my circle. Static chasing. At first, I didn't pay it much mind. I mean, static? On old TVs? Who cared? Months passed, and I slowly drifted away from all the groups and chats. Mailing lists, subreddits, Facebook groups, Discord servers, all of it. I was trying to reclaim a normal life. Looking back, it was pretty embarrassing. When you've got nothing but anxiety and endless hours, you grasp for anything to fill the void. But as things settled down, I wanted to move on. Every now and then, I'd get a message from someone, some genuinely concerned, others just curious. But eventually, even those stopped. That all changed last October. Maggie, Mags to most of us, was one of the most down-to-earth people I met back then. She was a moderator on several boards and had this knack for sparking debates. She could toss out a question like a grenade and sit back to watch the sparks fly. She had a sharp edge, but never crossed the line. There was always a twinkle in her eye. So when she messaged me out of the blue, 4 months after we'd lost contact, I knew something was wrong. Her message was simple, just 2 words. Help me. To my surprise, it came as a text to my private phone. I didn't even know she had my number. At first, I tried not to dwell on it. I felt bad, sure, but I reminded myself we'd shared many late-night talks about everything and nothing. For her, every conspiracy was just a new path for her mind to wander. Still, I tried to forget the message and move on. Then one night, a friend bailed on our movie plans, and suddenly I was alone with nothing to do. Irritated, I went back online to find something to watch. That message from Mags popped into my head again, and I found myself opening several tabs. I knew she'd been into static chasing lately, but what was that exactly? Who were these static chasers, and why did it matter? If you haven't heard of them, buckle up. These folks are something else. So, picture this. When an old TV loses signal, it shows that familiar black and white static, like a murmur of tiny dots flickering across the screen. That's background radiation in a way. Nowadays, most modern TVs just go to a blue or black screen when the signal drops, so kids today might never even see static like we did. I remember my brothers and I used to call it the ant war, arguing over whether the black or white dots outnumbered the other. But here's the thing. Static is different now. It's rare. And these static chasers pride themselves on hunting down any trace of static on analog devices. They post pictures, share stories, and genuinely love the sound. The crackling, the hiss. It's almost hypnotic. So I found some websites dedicated to this. Back down the rabbit hole I went. Facebook groups, YouTube channels, even some sketchy Patreon pages. It felt like a ghost from my past was reaching back into my brain. I knew these roads well. Then I stumbled upon the Static Chaser subreddit. That's when the unease started creeping in. It was a ghost town. 46,000 members, but only 2 people browsing. The moderators were all gone. No pinned posts, locked threads, abandoned. But the last post was just a couple of weeks old. Before that, the place buzzed with activity. Dozens of posts and hundreds of comments daily. Something had happened. I searched for Mags's username but came up empty. She had multiple backups, but no trace. I started reading through the final conversations. It was eerie. One user wrote, "I tried staying in front of it like you said. It really does change. But you gotta be there for hours. Is this safe?" That was the last post. No replies. Other posts talked about a new trend. People tuning their old TVs to static-heavy frequencies and just sitting in front of them. Instagram pics showed folks with coffee and biscuits in front of flickering screens. Cats napping on heavy CRTs. This was a community of thousands, sharing an odd but genuine passion. Then I noticed something else. People posting about their blots. Blots are rare black spots that appear in the static, like large inky splotches right in the center of the screen. Some static chasers looked for these patterns, teasing out meaning or just marveling at where they might come from. High-speed cameras could catch these fleeting moments. And there, among the blot enthusiasts, was Mags. "I don't get it," she posted. "Static's supposed to be background radiation, so why does it have a fucking head?" She shared photos, videos, sound files. Some were downright creepy. A 6-fingered hand pressed against the screen, a perfect white circle, an image that looked like an eye. But the creepiest was the last one, a screen entirely white except for the outline of a humanoid figure. No static. She said it stayed that way for 15 seconds. I messaged her, trying to understand. Mags had gotten tangled in all sorts of odd theories before, from anti-vax nonsense to bizarre government conspiracies. But this was different. She was posting guides, sharing her findings. She'd even dug out an old TV to try it herself. Whatever she'd found, it had shaken her. A week passed with no reply. No online presence. I tried calling the number she'd used, but nothing. I searched everywhere, but she'd kept her personal life under tight wraps. No social links, nothing. She was terrified of being doxxed. Curiosity gnawed at me. There had to be a reason she was so obsessed. Her guides were clear and methodical. Maybe I should try it. So I found my mom's old CRT TV in storage, dusted it off, and set it up. I had Mags's guide open on my laptop. The process was oddly technical. A powerful magnet placed near the flyback transformer, a specific orientation of the TV based on the transformer's location, tuning to a particular channel based on local broadcast stations. For me, living in rural Minnesota, that was channel 0506. The magnet sat just under the flyback transformer, cushioned by a thin layer of hardwood. I followed every step, but at first, it was just a blast of static, white and black dots dancing, accompanied by that familiar, monotone hiss. The guide warned me I'd need to wait for hours. I left it running and went about my day, stepping out briefly for groceries, but mostly staying nearby, reading about what might happen. Apparently, after a few hours, the static would start to rearrange. Forms, shapes, even sounds might emerge. I settled in front of the TV as dusk gave way to a relentless October rain. Outside, the trees swayed, the wind howling softly. I wrapped myself in a blanket, feeling vulnerable. What had Mags seen to send that message? Where had all the static chasers gone? What was I hoping to find? Answers? Proof? I nodded off a few times. It was like watching clouds. After a while, your mind fills in the shapes. But Mags wasn't the type to be spooked by illusions. Something real must have frightened her. Near midnight, I was about to give up. I leaned over to turn off the TV. That's when I saw it. A tiny black dot, unmoving amidst the swirling static. As I leaned closer, a vague shape took form, almost humanoid. And there was a strange sound layered over the static, a high-pitched tone. Slowly, the spot grew, becoming clearer. A figure with 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, completely ink black, moving through the static toward me. The high-pitched sound sharpened, and then it spoke, just barely audible over the hiss. Hello. My heart leapt. Panic surged, but I forced myself to stay put. I turned the TV off. The moment I touched the knob, a jolt shot through me. A spark? An electric surge? I couldn't tell. I felt numb. Suddenly, my vision went black. I was lying on my back, panting. No matter how I blinked or rubbed my eyes, everything remained pitch black. I tried to breathe deeply, to calm myself, but there was nothing. No warmth, no cold, no pain. My hands moved, but it wasn't real movement. It was like I was a mind floating in nothingness, imagining having a body. A sick feeling crept in, or maybe just the memory of sickness or panic. Far away, a light flickered. I felt drawn toward it. Slowly, I moved, imagining legs carrying me, though there were no legs. As I neared the light, parts of me began to return. I looked down to see my hands, translucent, flickering in and out like static textures, thin enough I could pass one through the other. The light was a sphere, a big white and black orb pulsing with static patterns, black and white dancing across its surface. It made a sound, growing louder in my mind. Static, but layered with voices. A million whispers, arguments, cries, people trapped inside. Closer inspection revealed the black spots weren't random. They were silhouettes, each one a person, stuck in the static. Millions, maybe billions. I turned to see the darkness beyond the sphere. It wasn't empty, but teeming with creatures. Some humanoid, others not. Screaming, crying, shouting, all converging on me. A universe of unspeakable horrors. Static filled my eyes and ears, desperate screams and hopeless cries. I was surrounded by terror and inevitability. Hands grabbed me, pulling me toward the sphere or tearing me apart. I tried to scream, but only static came out. Voices of the lost joining the endless chorus. Forever. Suddenly, a loud bang exploded. The transformer blew. Power cut out. I tumbled back in front of my TV. Time had barely passed. I lay on the floor, crying, screaming. That place was real. I'd been there. My fingers were numb, my body lost its bearings. I screamed again, but all I heard was static. Neighbors called the police. I barely remember being taken to the hospital or my brothers visiting. Doctors said it was a seizure, maybe epilepsy. I didn't argue. For days, I couldn't speak. I ended up at my younger brother's place, curled in a blanket on his couch. I forced myself to think, to feel alive. Was this what happened to Mags? What about the others? Memories of that void clawed at my mind, sending me into panic attacks. I cried myself to sleep more times than I can count. Once, the panic was so bad I lost control in a Walmart. I'm on sick leave now, seeing a therapist named Jane. She's nice, but focuses on things that don't quite help. I don't know. I found out Mags died. Electrocution. Along with about 24 others. There was a viewing party in Singapore where 4 people died. 2 Germans died sitting by a battery-powered radio. I think the faulty wiring in my TV and my apartment's power outage saved me. Without that, I'd be gone too, trapped in that sphere or torn apart. Forever static. But a part of me is still there. I can feel it whenever I hear static. I can see the black spots in the patterns. Remnants of people waiting for me. I'm sorry, Mags. I wish I could have helped. I really do. But I don't know what to do now. I want to tell you about my father, because he was probably the last man on earth you'd expect to be part of a story like this. He wasn't mystical in the slightest. He didn't believe in ghosts, spirits, heaven, signs, fate, reincarnation, any of it. He wasn't rude about it, really. He just had no patience for things that couldn't be proven, repaired, measured, or explained. He was a practical man, a wartime sailor, the sort of man who trusted a compass more than a feeling, and a toolbox more than a prayer. Which is exactly why this story has stayed with me. He told me it happened during the Second World War, when he was on shore leave in New Zealand. He and a few of the lads from his ship had gone out for drinks one evening in a busy little pub. You can picture it, I think. Smoke in the room, laughter bouncing off the walls, glasses knocking together, chairs scraping. Everyone talking too loudly because everyone else was talking too loudly too. They'd been there a good while, and at some point, one of them said, "Come on, let's find one more place before we call it a night." Just an ordinary thing to say, nothing dramatic. And my father, without pausing, said, "Right, we go out here, take the road past the bakery, turn right at the corner, down the slope, over the little stone bridge, and there's a pub just on the left. White railings out front, green door, lantern by the sign." He said it as naturally as if he were telling them where he'd left his coat. One of his mates looked at him and said, "Frankie, have you been there before?" And Dad said no, because he hadn't. He'd never been down that street, didn't know that part of town, hadn't seen it on a map, hadn't heard anybody talking about a pub over a bridge. He wasn't trying to impress anyone either. That wasn't his way. That's the bit I always come back to. He didn't announce it like a prophecy. He didn't make a performance out of it. He just said it, plainly, like the information had been sitting in his head all along. So they went. They stepped out into the cooler night, still joking at first. One of the men laughed and said, "Go on then, Frankie. Show us this magic pub of yours." They walked past the bakery. Then they turned right. Well, that could happen. Anyone could guess a turning. Then the road started to slope downhill. Still possible, I suppose. But then they saw the bridge. A small stone bridge, just where he'd said it would be. And that, according to my father, was when the laughing stopped. They crossed it together, their boots sounding hard in the quiet. The town seemed thinner there, softer somehow, with the dark water moving underneath them. When they reached the other side, they looked left, and there it was. A pub. White railings out front, green door, lantern by the sign, exactly as he'd described it. Not close, not almost. Exactly. My father had no explanation for it. None at all. He didn't turn religious afterward. He didn't start believing in spirits or messages or any grand hidden design. He didn't dress it up into something bigger than it was. He just said it happened. One strange little tear in the fabric of an otherwise sensible life. One moment where he seemed to know something he had no possible way of knowing. And then it never happened again. No warning came with it, no meaning, no voice from beyond. That's why I believe him, because he was not a man who went looking for wonder in the corners of things. He believed in rope, rain, steel, engines, and work. And still, just once, the impossible tapped him on the shoulder. Though I'll admit, it always makes me smile that the only unexplained moment of my father's entire life didn't lead him to enlightenment. It led him to another drink. I want to tell you about something that happened to me back in the summer of 2015 in southern Ecuador. At the time, I was helping out on my father's farm. He raised cattle, and every weekend after school, I would go out and help with the chores. Nothing unusual, really. I'd feed the cows, check that they had water, make sure none of them were sick or injured. It was just part of life out there. One Saturday afternoon, I went out later than usual to check the herd. I think it was close to 3:30 p.m. when I finally saddled my horse, Lucero, and headed out. He was a calm horse. Strong, gentle, the kind of animal you trusted without thinking twice. The ride took almost an hour. That summer had been dry, and there wasn't much grass left on our land, so my father had rented a stretch of untouched pasture nearby. I made it there without any trouble, checked on the cattle, and everything looked fine. By the time I started heading back, it was already getting close to evening. About halfway home, something changed. I felt this strange rush of wind against my body. Not a normal breeze. It felt colder somehow, heavier, like it had passed through something before reaching me. I remember thinking, very clearly, something is wrong. And right after that, Lucero reacted. He started pulling against the reins, tossing his head, moving his ears sharply from side to side. His body tensed up beneath me, and the hair along his neck stood on end. He kept trying to move toward the edge of the road, like he was desperate to avoid something I couldn't see. I tried to calm him down, but he wouldn't listen. That scared me more than anything at first, because he was not the kind of horse to panic for no reason. Then my head turned to the right, almost on its own. Just beyond the fence, standing in the brush, I saw a dark figure. It was small, maybe a little under 5 feet tall, and completely black, with no clear face or shape. It was there for just a second, but I know what I saw. And then it disappeared. It didn't run away. It didn't jump. It didn't make the sound a person or animal would make while escaping through dry brush. It was just there, and then it was gone. But the bushes behind the fence exploded with noise, like something heavy had crashed through them. Dry branches snapped loudly, even though I couldn't see anything moving anymore. That was when Lucero bolted. I held on as tightly as I could. My hands had gone numb from pulling the reins, and my whole body felt weak and stiff at the same time. I was confused, terrified, and just trying not to fall. For several minutes he ran like something was chasing us. Eventually he slowed down near a small stream. I got off, shaking, and bent down to drink some water. That was when I noticed my eyes were burning badly. It felt like someone had thrown pepper into them. I kept blinking, rubbing at them, but nothing helped. When I finally got home and took the saddle off Lucero, my mother looked at me and immediately asked what had happened to my eyes. I told her it was just sweat. I didn't want to explain anything yet. Honestly, I didn't even know how to explain it to myself. But when I went inside and looked in the mirror, I froze. My eyes were blood red. Not irritated, not a little pink. Red. There was almost no white left in them. It looked like both eyes had filled with blood. That was when I knew it had something to do with what I had seen by the fence. I went to a doctor later, but he couldn't give me a real explanation. The medicine didn't help either. My eyes stayed that way for almost 2 months before they finally cleared. When I eventually told my mother and my older brother the full story, they were shocked. My brother went out the next day to look at the spot where I had seen the figure. He told me there were no tracks, no broken branches, no marks in the brush. Nothing. The place looked completely untouched. That made it even worse for me somehow. Years have passed now, but I still remember every second of it. I have never gone back to that part of the farm. Lucero died not long ago, and that still hurts. He was the only one with me that day, the only one who felt whatever was out there before I even saw it. And sometimes I think about that. Whatever I saw behind that fence, he saw it too. I still think about my first time at Bachelor's Grove Cemetery. This happened probably 14 or 15 years ago, back when I was around 19. And even after all this time, it still bothers me in a way I can't quite shake. When I was a teenager, I was really into the idea of the paranormal. Shows like Ghost Hunters had me hooked. But I wouldn't say I fully believed in ghosts. I was curious, sure, but I was also skeptical. TV is TV, you know? For me to really believe in something like spirits, I felt like I'd have to experience it myself. One night, my close friend and bandmate Mason called me. He was our guitarist, and he was much more into the darker stuff than I was. Ghosts, cemeteries, strange folklore, all of it. He asked if I wanted to go ghost hunting at Bachelor's Grove with him and a few friends around the witching hour. At the time, I had no idea what Bachelor's Grove even was. He told me it was this legendary haunted cemetery about an hour away, tucked back in the woods. The second he explained that, my curiosity took over. After years of watching ghost hunting shows, here was my chance to maybe see something for myself. So I drove over to Mason's house and met up with everyone. When I got there, I realized there were 7 of us going, and honestly, that made me a little nervous. Mason had already told me we'd probably have to sneak in because police sometimes patrolled the area looking for people doing exactly what we were about to do. 7 people trying to slip into a haunted cemetery at night didn't exactly feel subtle. One of the people there was someone I'd never met before. He was a friend of Mason's, this massive guy, probably close to 7 feet tall, in his mid-20s. He said he was a medium. I'll be honest, I was skeptical right away. But I also thought, what do I know? Maybe having someone like that with us would help. Maybe he'd sense something. Maybe this was exactly the kind of person you wanted around if you were trying to find proof of the paranormal. So we headed out. When we got near the cemetery, we parked about a mile away on a side street. From there, we had to find this hidden path through the woods that ran alongside the road and led toward the old cemetery entrance. Walking through those woods was intense. It was pitch black, and at one point, we nearly got caught by a police spotlight sweeping through the trees. We all froze, ducked low, and waited for it to pass. Eventually, we found the old rusty gate and slipped through. And then we were inside Bachelor's Grove Cemetery at around 2 in the morning. At first, it felt exactly how you'd expect. My adrenaline was high. I was listening to every tiny sound, watching every shadow. But what stood out most was how quiet it was. Not peaceful quiet, dead quiet. No birds, no wind, no leaves moving. The air felt completely still. We wandered around for maybe 20 or 30 minutes, taking pictures and looking at the old headstones. And honestly, after a while, the fear started to fade. I remember thinking, this is just an old cemetery in the woods. There are 7 of us. Nothing is happening. There's nothing to be afraid of. Even the medium seemed calm. He wasn't acting nervous. He didn't say he felt anything strange. It was just us, the trees, and a bunch of old graves. Then suddenly, he stopped walking. He froze completely. For a few seconds, he didn't say anything. Then, in this panicked voice, he said, "We need to leave, right now." At first, I was annoyed. We had driven an hour, snuck through the woods, avoided the police, and we had barely been there. So Mason asked him what was wrong. The medium just kept saying, "It's not good. We need to go now." I don't know if his panic started affecting me or if something really did change, but right then, the entire place felt different. The woods seemed darker, closer, like the trees had leaned inward while we weren't looking. And when this huge mountain of a man suddenly turned and ran for the exit, none of us argued. We ran too. When we reached the entrance, we stopped to catch our breath and started asking him what had happened. He said the energy in the cemetery had shifted fast. According to him, it had turned malicious, and we weren't welcome there anymore. He said it was getting angrier the longer we stayed. Part of me still didn't believe him. I remember thinking that if he hadn't been there, we probably would have stayed all night and nothing would have happened. So we laughed it off a little, tried to act like we weren't shaken, and left. But the scariest part of that night hadn't happened yet. The cemetery sits inside a large forest preserve near a neighborhood. When you leave the entrance, there's a long, dark road with houses on one side and woods on the other. Farther down, there's a 4-way intersection with one lonely street lamp hanging over it. Instead of taking the hidden path back through the trees, we decided to walk down the road. Our cars were a few blocks past that intersection. There weren't any sidewalks, so we walked in the middle of the street, talking and joking, trying to shake off what had just happened. As we got closer to that intersection, I found myself staring at the yellow light from the street lamp. I don't know why, but I couldn't stop looking at it. Then I stopped. Something black was moving at the edge of the light. At first, I thought it was someone walking a dog. The shape was low and animal-like, creeping out from the darkness on the right side of the road. But then it stepped fully under the street lamp, and there was no person. No leash. Nothing. I whispered, "Guys, look ahead." Everyone stopped. It wasn't a dog. It was much bigger than any dog I'd ever seen. Bigger than a Great Dane. The way it moved reminded me more of a lion stalking through grass, with its head low and its shoulders high. Its body was completely black, not just dark-colored, but like the light couldn't touch it. It was standing directly beneath the street lamp, but no detail showed in its fur, just a solid black silhouette. Then it stopped. It turned its head toward us, and its eyes were glowing. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. We just stood there, locked in place, staring at this thing while it stared back at us. Then another shape stepped out of the darkness, and then a third. 3 huge black creatures stood under that street lamp, all of them facing us. I've only felt fear like that a few times in my life. Real fear. The kind that empties your mind except for one thought. and all I could think was, please don't run at us. It felt like we stood there forever. Finally, the first one turned away and walked down the road to the left. The other two followed. One by one, they disappeared into the darkness. We stayed frozen for a few more seconds before slowly moving toward the intersection. When we got there, I looked down the road where they had gone. It was long and straight, and we should have been able to see them. But they were gone. Completely gone. After that, I remember walking as fast as I could toward the cars while looking over my shoulder the entire time. I kept expecting them to be behind us, but nothing came. We got in our cars and drove home, all of us asking the same question. What the hell did we just see? Years later, I searched for black spirit dog online, and one of the first things I found was the word Barghest. In Northern English folklore, it's a black dog with fiery eyes, often seen as an omen of death. I can't say that's what we saw. I can't prove any of it. But a few years after that night, Mason told me the medium had passed away. And years after that, Mason himself died by suicide. I'm not saying those things are connected. I don't know that they are. But I do know this. I still think about that night. I still see that street lamp. And I still remember those 3 black shapes staring back at us from the road. Hey everyone. I figured I'd share what happened to me tonight because, honestly, I'm still a little shaken up. I've been trying to be better about getting exercise in, so I've started going on walks almost every day. There are 2 old cemeteries near where I live, sitting right across the road from each other, and I actually like walking there because the path around the larger one is just over a mile. It's peaceful, usually. Quiet in a way that doesn't bother me. Most of the time I go during the day, but I work nights, so sometimes the only time I can squeeze in a walk is pretty late. Tonight ended up being one of those nights. I woke up around 5:30, handled a few errands, came home, and then wasted a couple hours lying around doing absolutely nothing. Around 9:15, I finally told myself to stop being lazy and go get my walk in. So I got dressed, grabbed my little flashlight, and drove over to the cemeteries. I parked along the fence by the bigger cemetery, near the gate, with the smaller one right across the street. I usually walk through both, so I started with the smaller cemetery first. I wasn't in any rush. I just wandered along the paths, shining my flashlight gently over some of the headstones, reading names here and there. After that, I crossed back over to the larger cemetery and started my usual loop around the outside path. And the thing is, I've walked there at all kinds of strange hours before. 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, whenever. I've never really gotten that awful, creepy feeling people talk about. Tonight felt the same at first. I had a podcast playing in one ear. I was moving at an easy pace, and every now and then I stopped to fix little things at the graves. A small angel statue that had tipped over, a plastic flower arrangement that had fallen sideways, little keepsakes that had been knocked down by the wind. Nothing unusual. Then I got close to finishing the loop. I was coming up from behind where my car was parked, and from that angle I could see straight through the back window. There was a street light nearby, and the light hit the inside of my car just enough for me to see it. There was a man sitting in my back seat. Not a maybe shape, not a weird blur. I mean a clear, dark silhouette of someone sitting upright in the back of my car. I stopped right where I was. For a few seconds, I just stared. I didn't move. I kept telling myself it had to be a shadow, or a trick of the light, or my tired brain stitching together something that wasn't there. But the longer I looked, the more solid it seemed. My first thought wasn't ghost. My first thought was, there's someone alive in my car. I live in a mostly okay area, but it's not perfect, and there have been a few reports recently about cars being broken into. So in that moment, I was convinced I had caught someone in the act. I stepped off the paved path and moved between the rows of headstones, trying to take a wider angle so I could see into the car from the side. Since I was walking alone at night, I did have my gun on me, and I drew it while keeping my eyes locked on that shape in the back seat. Then I saw the head move. Just a little turn. Either toward me or toward the opposite window, I couldn't tell. There were no features, no face, no clothes, just that dark outline of a person. I crouched behind a larger headstone and tried to steady myself. Then I remembered that if I hit the unlock button on my key fob, the interior lights would come on. So I did. The lights flashed on inside the car, and there was nothing there. No man, no movement, no one ducking down, nothing. I stood there for a second, frozen all over again, because my brain just couldn't make that make sense. Then I walked out through the gate and circled the entire car, still expecting someone to pop out or be crouched on the floor somehow. I checked through every window, looked down between the seats, even though there really isn't anywhere for a full-grown person to hide in a little hatchback. There was nobody. No broken window. No open door. No sign anyone had been inside. After I convinced myself there wasn't a person hiding in there, or anything else waiting to grab my ankle, I got in that car and drove home faster than I probably should have. I've had a few strange experiences before, but this one really got under my skin. I keep replaying it in my head and I know what I saw. Honestly, I'm half tempted to sage the car tomorrow. I still think about the house we moved out of 2 years ago. We moved into it back in 1989, and the strange thing is, it was a new build. You'd think that would make it feel clean somehow, untouched. But from the beginning, there was something about that place that never felt quite right. Even early on, I started wondering if there was something in the house, maybe some kind of opening or portal. I didn't have much to go on back then. People didn't talk about the paranormal the way they do now, and information on parapsychology was harder to find. But I kept trying to make sense of what was happening. The oddest part was that it wasn't constant. I could go weeks, sometimes months, without feeling anything at all. Then, out of nowhere, I'd walk through a patch of freezing air in a place where there were no vents, no drafts, no reason for it. And then I'd never feel that cold spot in the same place again. Late at night, I'd sometimes see shapes on the basement walls. Not full figures exactly, more like outlines of people standing there in the dark. Then they'd disappear for a while, and weeks later, different ones would show up. Other nights, I'd notice shadows moving around near the front hallway by the door. From my bedroom, I had a clear view down toward that area, and I can still remember the awful feeling that whatever was down there knew I was looking. On nights like that, I would not go downstairs unless every light was on. The foyer, the kitchen, the dining room, the living room, the family room, all of it. Any dark room felt like it had eyes in it. But then there were other nights when the house felt completely normal. I could walk downstairs in the dark, grab a drink or whatever I needed, and go right back up without a second thought. That was part of what made it so hard to explain. The whole place seemed to change from day to day. I also had night terrors in that house. Sometimes I'd wake up shaken, and a few times I had scratches on me that were actually bleeding. I still don't know what to make of that. 2 moments, though, have stayed with me more than anything else. The first happened back when I was still comfortable sleeping with my bedroom door open. One night, I heard a voice that sounded like my mother calling me from downstairs. I shot straight up in bed, not sure if I had dreamed it or if I had really heard it. Then it happened again. This time, it sounded like it was coming from the basement. After that night, I never slept with my door open again. I kept it shut and locked. The second moment happened when I was completely alone in the house. No television on, no radio, no one else home. I was sitting on my bed reading Edgar Allan Poe, completely absorbed in it because I've always loved his writing. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a voice. It was barely there, so faint it was almost at the edge of what a person can hear. But I heard it clearly enough. It said, "Hi." Just that one word, nothing before it, nothing after it. That house had a way of doing that. Some days it was still and empty. Other days, when I was alone, I'd hear little noises, or one sudden loud bang from my parents' bedroom. When there was carpet in that room, it sounded like a heavy thud. After they replaced the carpet with hardwood, it sounded more like something metal or brass hitting the floor. I checked more than once when the carpet was still there, and once after the hardwood was put in. I never found a single thing out of place. I don't live there anymore, but I still wonder about it. Part of me wants to reach out to the new owners someday and ask if they've noticed anything unusual, if they've felt watched, if they've heard voices, footsteps, bangs, whispers, if they've seen shadows where shadows shouldn't be. And honestly, I'd like to know whether they'd ever allow someone to investigate the place. Because after all these years, I still don't have answers. But I know what I felt in that house. I know what I heard. And whatever it was, it never felt completely gone. I've been unsure for a long time about sharing this, because one part of me keeps trying to stay logical, but another part of me feels honestly shaken by everything that has happened over the past year. I'm 23, from India, and my home life has become extremely painful emotionally. It started because of serious conflict with my parents over my long-distance relationship. At first, it was just arguments, but slowly, it turned into something much heavier. I started feeling watched all the time, pressured, controlled, humiliated, like I had no real privacy anymore. There was constant tension, constant fighting, and eventually, I didn't feel emotionally safe in my own house. But the hardest part wasn't only the control. It was seeing people I once trusted lose their compassion completely. The breaking point came when my girlfriend's father passed away recently. I wanted to go for the funeral and final rites. He mattered to me, and I cared deeply about my girlfriend and her family. I felt that being there was the right thing to do. But I was stopped from going. During one of the arguments, my father said something like, "So many people die every day in Kashi. What difference does one more death make?" And my mother said, "There are many deaths I couldn't attend either. Why is this one so different for you? You need to accept life." Then, during the funeral itself, my mother apparently called my girlfriend's grieving mother and disrespected both her and my girlfriend while they were already dealing with a death in the family. I remember completely breaking down and saying, "Where is your humanity? Where is your heart?" But all I felt around me was ego, coldness, darkness. That moment did something to me. It felt like something inside me cracked. Around the same time, death started appearing everywhere in my life. Or at least, that's how it began to feel. First, my uncle passed away after years of drinking. Then, just a few days later, another family acquaintance suddenly died of a heart attack, even though he had seemed fine. Then someone connected to a friend passed away. Then my girlfriend's father died from heart failure. And while all this was happening, I also began noticing dead or suffering animals around me more intensely. A dead cow, 2 dogs, later another cow. I know, logically, these things may not be connected at all, but emotionally, it started to feel like death was everywhere, like the air around me had become heavy. There was one moment that really disturbed me. My mother was driving near a cow, and I kept shouting, "Brake, brake, brake!" For a second, I truly believed she was going to hit it, because her reaction felt delayed to me. Nothing actually happened, but my mind was already so full of fear and heaviness that the moment stayed with me. After all of this, I became extremely aware of everything inside my home. At night, I started feeling afraid. My sleep got worse. I felt drained all the time. There was this heaviness in the house, and there were moments when I genuinely felt like something moved nearby, even when nobody was there. Not in a dramatic horror movie way, more like a subtle shift, a presence. That split-second feeling that someone is there, and then nothing. One night, around 10:45 p.m., I was on a call with someone, trying to explain that maybe all of this was just stress, or my mind reacting to everything. I turned around, and for a brief second, I thought I saw a dark, human-like figure. It was quick, not clear, not detailed, but it disturbed me badly. After that, my mind started connecting everything. My father and my cousin Arvind have both experienced sleep paralysis before, and suddenly, my brain began linking it all together. The deaths, the heaviness, the cruelty, the strange feeling in the house, the sleep problems, that figure. At the same time, I really do want to stay grounded. I understand that stress, grief, emotional abuse, fear, trauma, sleep deprivation, and hypervigilance can seriously affect perception. I know they can make an ordinary place feel threatening, charged, or spiritually wrong. So I'm not asking anyone to tell me I'm possessed, cursed, haunted, or dealing with demons. What I'm really asking is this: has anyone else ever felt a home become emotionally or spiritually heavy after long periods of conflict, grief, hatred, or emotional collapse? And how do you tell the difference between trauma and hypervigilance changing the way you perceive things versus something that truly feels spiritually negative? Because honestly, I strongly feel like there is some negative presence in my home. I'd really appreciate grounded responses, not fear-based ones, because I already feel exhausted enough. I grew up in Utah, born and raised, and one of the things I'm really grateful for is that I got to know my great-grandma, Margaret. She was such a gentle, loving woman, the kind of person who made every grandchild feel like they belonged in her kitchen. When I was little, I spent a lot of time at her house with my cousins and my brother. On that side of the family, there were hardly any girls around, just me and one girl cousin who wasn't there very often. So most of the time, I was surrounded by boys, and of course, they loved trying to scare me. They used to say Great-Grandma Margaret's house was haunted. There were two stories they always told. One was about a little boy who had been hit by a car on the road in front of the house. That street was supposed to be slow, but people flew down it like they were racing. We were never allowed anywhere near the curb. If we stepped off the lawn, we knew we were in serious trouble. The other story was worse. Supposedly, before my great-grandfather bought the house in the early 60s, a child had died there. The way I heard it as a kid, he had fallen from the top bunk in one of the bedrooms, hit his head badly, and passed away. That room became known in our family as the cold room. And it really was cold. Even in the middle of summer, when the rest of the house felt hot and stuffy, that room stayed chilly. The house didn't have central air or anything like that. It was just that room. Always that room. My first real experience happened when I was about 7. It was Thanksgiving, and I'd been dropped off at great-grandma's while my mom helped cook at another house. Like a lot of older relatives, my great-grandma believed kids needed naps, whether they wanted them or not, so she tucked me into the bed in the cold room. I remember falling asleep for a little while. Then I woke up because it felt like someone had sat down at the end of the bed. Not an adult. The weight felt smaller than that. I opened my eyes just a little. The curtains were closed, the door was shut, and nobody was there. So I squeezed my eyes closed again and tried to convince myself I was imagining it. But the feeling stayed. A few minutes later, the bottom of the bed started bouncing. Not shaking a little, bouncing, like someone was sitting there and hopping up and down. I opened my eyes and I could see the bed moving. The whole mattress was shifting, but there was no one there. I threw the blankets off, ran out of that room, and locked myself in the bathroom across the hall. I just sat there, trying to understand what had happened. When I finally came out, Great-Grandma Margaret was sitting at the kitchen table with her coffee. I was terrified she'd make me go finish my nap, so I just told her I wasn't tired anymore and asked if I could play with my dolls. Thankfully, she let me. A few months later, something else happened. I was in the front room with my younger uncle, Danny, and my older brother. We were playing with blocks when we heard this tiny bell ringing. It sounded like one of those little bike bells. Then came a strange clicking noise. We all realized it was coming from the cold room. My great-grandma walked in and saw all three of us sitting there, nowhere near that room, and her face changed. She looked confused, but also not completely surprised. My uncle got up, walked into the cold room, and came back carrying an old Fisher-Price activity toy, the kind with little buttons and doors and bells. He put it on the coffee table, laughed a little, and said, "He sure likes this one." At the time, I didn't understand what that meant. Years later, my mom told me that toy had been doing things on its own since she was a kid. The bell would ring by itself. The little parts would click and move when nobody was touching it. She also told me she once saw a jewelry box lift into the air in my great-grandma's bedroom and then drop the second someone walked in. Another time, one of Great-Grandma Margaret's wig heads lifted up by itself and fell as soon as she came back into the room. My great-uncle Danny seemed to see the little boy the most. He would say he'd seen him peeking out from the cold room or from down the hallway. Sometimes records would be pulled off shelves in his bedroom. My great-grandfather even said that once, while he was working in the garage, he saw little feet walking around near the car. At first he thought it was one of the kids, but then he realized the feet were far too small. This went on in that house for years. My grandma experienced it, my mom experienced it, my uncles experienced it, and then I did too. Great-Grandma Margaret passed away when I was 9, but my great-uncle stayed in that house for many years after. When he passed away in 2022, the family finally decided to sell it. I went there with my husband to help clean and pack things up. While we were sorting through the house, I mentioned to another great-uncle how the older cousins used to scare us by saying the place was haunted. He looked at me and said, very calmly, "Well, a little boy did die here before my dad bought the house." I asked how he knew. He said it was in the property records. Then I asked how the boy died, and he told me the records said the child had fallen while climbing out of bed and hit his head. I got chills all over. Because suddenly, it wasn't just some creepy story my cousins made up to scare me. It was real. Or at least, the beginning of it was. And even as an adult, walking through that house for the last time, I still stayed away from the cold room. So, this was my first real ghost hunt. I wanted to try it for years, but it was always one of those things I talked about and never actually did. Then my friend Rowan, who had all the equipment, invited me out, and I couldn't say no. I went with Rowan, my close friend Alina, and her boyfriend Jay, and the four of us drove out to this old ghost town not too far away. We got there around 8:30 at night, and at first, it was exactly what I'd hoped for. Empty buildings, weird shadows, that heavy quiet you only get in abandoned places. We were walking around, checking everything out, getting creeped out in the best way, and then, suddenly the cops showed up and kicked us out. I was honestly so annoyed. Everything I had seen online made it seem like the place was open all night, so we were all standing there thinking, seriously? We came all this way for this? But instead of just giving up, we decided to go to the cemetery nearby. When we got there, we walked around for a bit, reading the names on the headstones and just taking in the atmosphere. Then we found a random spot to sit down, and Rowan pulled out the spirit box. We decided to try the noise-canceling headphones and blindfold method right away. Rowan went first because he actually knew how the equipment worked. At first, nothing major happened. Just static, broken sounds, little bits that could have been words but weren't clear enough to count. Then we started getting answers. Not just random noises either. It felt more like something was actually responding to us. We asked if it was from the town, if it remembered its family, if it knew its mother's name. Most of the answers were quiet and sad. Things like, "I don't know," or "no memory." The only things it seemed to remember were strange. It didn't give us a first name, but it called itself Smith's Boy, and then said the last name was Jameson. We asked if Smith Jameson was its father's name, and the response was, "Close." But that was all we got. After a while, Jay took the headphones and blindfold. He was the skeptical one in the group, so I was really curious to see what would happen with him. At first, he said he wasn't hearing anything except static. No words, no voices, nothing. Then, after a few minutes, he suddenly said, "Connection." I asked, "Are you having trouble connecting through Jay?" And he answered, "Yes." That was when things started to shift. We asked, "What's your name?" Jay said, "Woman." So we asked, "Are you a woman?" "Yes." Then we asked again, "What is your name?" There was a long burst of static, and then Jay said, "I am Angel." We asked, "Are you an angel?" "Yes." Then we asked if it had a name. Jay couldn't tell if the answer was Mira or Mika, but he was sure it started with an M. So I said, "Is it okay if we call you Angel M?" And the answer was, "Yes." Now, I don't know if it was really an angel. I'm not claiming that. But whatever it was, it didn't feel cruel. At least, not at first. We kept asking questions, and then suddenly Jay said his own name. Jay. That scared all of us. I asked, "Are you watching over Jay?" "No." "Are you watching over Alina?" "No." "Are you watching over us?" There was a pause. Then Jay said, "Behind." We all immediately moved closer together. None of us were brave in that moment. We were just four nervous people in a cemetery, huddling like baby raccoons in a thunderstorm. We actually yanked the headphones off Jay because we panicked, and he was definitely not happy about that. Eventually, we put them back on him. Then Rowan, for reasons I still do not understand, decided to ask scarier questions. He asked, "Is there something here with us?" "Yes." "Are we safe?" "Yes. Safe. Safe. Protect." That made us feel a little better. We were still scared, but there was this tiny piece of comfort in thinking Angel M might be protecting us. Then Rowan asked, "What are you protecting us from?" Jay answered, "Evil. Human." And I'm not going to lie, part of me really hoped it just meant the cops were still hanging around the ghost town. After that, things got weird again. We were asking random questions, and Alina and I were joking around a little because we were trying not to freak ourselves out too badly. Then Angel M came through again. Jay said, "Leave behind. Run, run. Danger, evil." That was it for us. We grabbed Jay, threw everything into the bag as fast as we could, and practically flew back to my car. I don't think any of us breathed normally until we were back on the road. Even though I was genuinely terrified, I had so much fun. Horror movies and scary stories don't usually get to me anymore. But being there in person, hearing those answers, feeling that shift in the air, it was completely different. We're planning to go ghost hunting again this Saturday. We might try an old massacre site, or maybe go back to the actual ghost town and see if we can explore more this time. So what do you think? Was Angel M really an angel, or something else pretending to be one? And if anyone has tips, challenges, or ideas for things we should try next time, I'd love to hear them. I've always had this strange little soft spot for ghosts and spirits. Not in a dramatic way exactly. It's just always been there, ever since I was a kid. I've had odd things happen around me before, so when something creepy happens, I don't immediately fall apart. I usually just sort of pause and think, all right, what was that? But this one was different. This happened in the house I'm living in now. I'd already had the feeling that something was here with us. In my old place, whatever was there felt heavy, angry almost, dark in a way I didn't like. But in this house, it felt different, lighter, almost playful, if that makes sense. There had been little things for a while. My glasses would turn up somewhere completely different from where I'd left them. We'd hear knocking. The dog would suddenly bark at empty corners of the room. Sometimes the TV would turn itself on when nobody was anywhere near the remote. Strange, yes, but not threatening. Then one afternoon, I was sitting in the living room. From where I was sitting, I could see partway down the hall toward the bathroom. Out of nowhere, the shower turned on. And I just thought, okay, Lena must be taking a shower. A few minutes went by, and then I thought, is she seriously not going to close the bathroom door? So I called out to her. I asked why she hadn't shut the door. And then she came out of her bedroom, upstairs. She looked at me and said, "What are you talking about?" I just sat there, staring at her, because honestly, what do you even say to that? I told her the shower had turned on by itself, and we both sort of laughed, because by then, we already had this running idea that something in the house was messing with us. Now, one important detail. There's an attic hatch in my bedroom ceiling. Lovely, right? Exactly what you want above your bed. Anyway, later that night, I woke up standing in the corner of my room. Not sitting up. Not dreaming in the normal way. Standing. And I was looking at myself asleep in my bed. I remember thinking very clearly, what is happening right now? Then the attic hatch in my ceiling slowly opened, and this little boy climbed down. He looked maybe 5 or 6 years old. He was wearing dark shorts, long black socks, little black shoes, and a tweed vest over a white shirt. His hair was pale blonde, but his face was strange. It was blurred somehow, like I couldn't quite focus on it. I was terrified, completely frozen, but at the same time, I was weirdly curious. Then he took my hand, and he started leading me around my own house. He showed me the living room first. He turned the TV on and off, over and over, like it was the funniest trick in the world. Then he knocked on the walls. He ran over to the dog and played with him. The whole time he was laughing. Not quietly either. Full, joyful, little kid laughter. Then he took me into the bathroom, and he turned on the shower. That was when it hit me. I looked at him and thought, it's you. You're the one doing all of this. And somehow, I wasn't scared anymore. I started smiling. Then I started laughing too, because it suddenly felt less like something haunting us, and more like a little kid proudly showing me all his favorite toys. I woke up the next morning and told my family everything. I was laughing while I explained it, and honestly, it became this strange little family joke. Now, whenever something odd happens in the house, someone will say, "Must be him." I've never seen him again. I've never had another dream that vivid either. But I still think about him. And whoever he is, wherever he is, I really hope he's happy. Something happened a couple of weeks ago, and honestly, I still don't really know what to do with it. I was at home when I suddenly caught something out of the corner of my eye, just off to my left. I turned my head, and for the briefest second, I saw a young man standing there. And when I say brief, I mean it was almost instant, a blink of a moment. But in that tiny little slice of time, it felt like we looked right at each other, like he saw me seeing him. The strange part is, I don't think I saw him in the normal way. Not exactly with my eyes. I know that sounds ridiculous, and I don't really know how else to explain it, but it was almost like the image appeared right in front of me and inside my head at the same time. Not like imagination though, not like daydreaming. It was more like I was seeing him from somewhere right at the front of my forehead, but it still felt as clear as looking with my eyes. It left me feeling completely unsettled. At first, I tried to shake it off. I told myself I was being dramatic, or tired, or letting my mind play tricks on me. I don't usually jump straight to anything supernatural anyway, and another reason I dismissed it was because of the way he was dressed. Our house is Edwardian, but he looked much too old-fashioned for that, at least from what little I thought I knew. But the more I tried to ignore it, the more it kept circling around in my mind. So eventually, I started looking things up. What I remembered most was his clothing. He had on a brown jacket and matching trousers, but the trousers were not full length. They came to just below the knee, loose at the top and tighter around the knee. The fabric looked rough, maybe wool or tweed, and it was that dull brown color of a paper envelope. Under the jacket, he had some kind of white shirt. The jacket itself looked odd to me, almost lopsided, because the buttons didn't fasten straight down the middle. They fastened more toward one side, and the lower part of the jacket had this boxy shape. Then, just beneath the knee where the trousers ended, I saw white fabric showing underneath. At first, I thought it was a ruffle, which is one of the reasons I convinced myself it must have been nonsense. In my mind, ruffles belong to some much older time period, not an Edwardian house. His hair stood out too. It was longer than I expected, falling just under his ears, and it was parted very sharply to one side. He looked young, maybe somewhere between 18 and 25. I wish I could remember his shoes, but I can't. The thing is, when I researched it, the details started matching up in a way I really didn't expect. I focused mostly on the trousers, because that was the clearest part of what I saw. I found out that young men around the late Victorian and Edwardian period sometimes wore knickerbocker-style trousers for casual wear, or outdoor activities like cycling, golf, walking, or shooting. Basically their version of relaxed clothing. And the white ruffle I thought I saw may not have been a ruffle at all. It could have been white cotton or linen undergarments showing beneath the wool or tweed. Apparently, those underlayers were worn partly to protect the more expensive outer fabric, because cotton and linen could be washed much more easily and often. That honestly gave me chills, because what I saw was exactly that, a rough brown matching outfit over white material. I also found out that younger men sometimes wore their hair longer and parted strongly to one side, just like he did. I don't have any real knowledge of historical clothing. I wouldn't have known what knickerbockers were, or why white fabric might show underneath, or that young men dressed that way. If anything, I had talked myself out of believing it because I thought his clothes didn't fit the house or the period. So now I'm left with this strange feeling that maybe I did see something. The part I keep getting stuck on is why a young man would be there. I always think of hauntings, rightly or wrongly, as being tied to death. But surely, young men didn't often die at home. Then again, maybe it wasn't that kind of thing. Maybe it was more like a trace or residual energy, if you believe in that. But it didn't feel completely residual. It felt like he knew I was looking, like there was a moment of mutual recognition, even if it lasted less than a second. And still, part of me wants to talk myself out of it. I keep thinking maybe I imagined it. Maybe I was tired. Maybe something strange happened in my brain for a second. I don't know. All I can say is that I know what I saw, even if I saw it in the strangest way possible. I'd honestly love to hear from anyone who has thoughts on this. Spiritualists, skeptics, historians, anyone with knowledge of clothing from that era, or even someone with a medical explanation. Because right now, I'm standing in the middle of all those possibilities, holding this tiny, impossible moment like a match in the dark. So this happened a little over 15 years ago, back in Guadeloupe, on one of those Caribbean nights where the darkness feels thicker than it should. At the time, I was living in a small town called Vieux-Habitant, and my mother, Mireille, had recently moved to a place closer to Petit Bourg. I had never actually stayed at her new house before, so I didn't really know the place or the area around it. Around that same period, I got a job as a school supervisor in Pointe-à-Pitre, and for anyone who knows Guadeloupe, getting there from Petit Bourg was much easier than commuting from where I lived. So my mother told me, just stay at my place during the week. It'll save you time. Which sounded perfectly reasonable, until I saw the house. It wasn't scary in an obvious way, not at first, but it was the kind of place that made you aware of how alone you were. It sat off a dirt road, surrounded by thick vegetation, with no real neighbors nearby, no streetlights, no comforting little glow from another house in the distance. Just trees, insects, darkness, and one landlord who lived farther down the path. For the first few days, I didn't think too much about it. I was tired from work, so my routine was simple: eat, shower, sleep, repeat. Then one evening, my mother went out to spend time with friends, and I was left alone in the house for the first time. I got ready for bed, turned off the lights, and was just starting to drift off when I heard something above me. Footsteps. Clear footsteps. I opened my eyes and listened. Nothing. So I told myself I was half asleep and tried to relax again. Then it happened a second time. Heavy steps, right over my head. I turned the light back on and looked around the room like the ceiling was going to suddenly confess. Nothing. No cracks, no movement, no explanation. The sound stopped. I lay back down. And then it started again. Now, I should say this clearly. I'm not someone who believes in ghosts. I've always been pretty rational about that kind of thing. I can enjoy a spooky story, sure, but I usually file it in the same drawer as legends, folklore, and things people swear happened to their cousin's friend. But when you're alone in a house surrounded by jungle, and something is walking above your head in the dark, your brain becomes very interested in finding an answer. So I got up and searched the house, room by room, closets, corners, windows, the little storage area, everywhere. Nothing. And somehow, that made it worse. At one point, I actually convinced myself someone had broken in. Then I thought maybe an appliance was making the noise. So I unplugged the television, then the fan, then a few kitchen appliances. I was unplugging things like I was performing an exorcism with electrical safety. And still, the footsteps came back. Only this time, there was another sound with them. Chains. Metal dragging and clinking above the ceiling. That was the moment my rational mind started packing its bags. Because I was alone, in the middle of nowhere, hearing footsteps and chains moving across the roof in total darkness. I called my mother. No answer. I texted her. Still nothing. For about half an hour, the sounds moved from one side of the ceiling to the other. Step, drag, step, clink. Like something heavy was pacing up there, taking its time. Eventually, I made the decision that every doomed person in a horror movie makes. I went outside. It was pitch black. No city lights, no moonlight worth mentioning, nothing. I had a flashlight in my hand, but for some reason I didn't turn it on right away, because apparently I didn't want whatever was up there to notice me. That was my brilliant strategy. I crept around the side of the house, trying to stay quiet, and that's when I noticed something I somehow hadn't paid attention to before. The back of the house was built into a slope. The ground rose up behind it, almost like the hill had swallowed part of the wall. From that side, someone, or something, could climb the earth and reach the flat roof pretty easily. So I looked up, and I saw two glowing eyes staring straight down at me. They didn't move. They just watched. Behind them was a huge, dark shape. Now this is where a smarter person would have left immediately. A wiser person would have gone back inside, locked the door, and waited for daylight like a functioning adult. But I am not always that person. So I walked closer. Then I heard it. A low grunt. Then the sound of chains dragging again. The shape shifted backward. That's when I finally turned on the flashlight and aimed it up. And there it was. The biggest pig I had ever seen in my life. Not a cute little farm pig, not some charming countryside animal. This thing was enormous. A muddy, snorting, roof-walking beast. A full-blown pork colossus. For nearly 2 hours, I had been lying in bed, thinking I might be experiencing something supernatural, while this gigantic pig was casually pacing back and forth on the roof like it owned the place. What probably happened is that it escaped from somewhere nearby while still attached to part of its chain. It climbed up the slope behind the house, reached the roof, and either couldn't get back down or simply decided the roof had excellent nightlife. And honestly, that's why I still think about this story. Because when people hear something strange or see something they don't understand, fear rushes in first. And once fear takes the wheel, imagination starts painting monsters in every shadow. Sometimes the explanation is not paranormal at all. Sometimes it's much more ordinary. And sometimes it's covered in mud and built like a small car. I want to tell you about something that happened a few years ago, because even now, I still think about it. At the time, I was about 19 or 20. My partner was a little older than me, around 22. My little sister was 12, and my baby brother was only about 4. Back then, I lived full-time with my grandfather. My mom had her own place with my sister and brother, but the kids would sometimes come over and stay with me. I'd watch them, make sure they were fed, keep them entertained, all of that. That night started out completely normal. We were downstairs in my grandfather's condo. It wasn't a basement or anything, more like a lower-level living area with a sliding glass door that led out to the shared backyard space. We had a mattress laid out on the floor, and my brother was sitting on it with my sister. I was standing a few feet away from them, near one of the downstairs windows. The sliding glass door was shut, and the blinds over it were closed because it was nighttime. The only blinds open were on the regular window beside me. My partner had just left to pick up food for everyone. I mean, she had barely been gone for a minute. And then the whole room changed. I don't really know how else to explain it. It felt like all the air got pulled out at once. Like the room suddenly went hollow. My sister felt it too, because she immediately looked over at me. The second we made eye contact, my brother stood up. His face went completely pale. Then he started screaming. Not crying, screaming. He was pointing at the window near me, yelling that something was standing outside. My stomach dropped so hard I felt sick. My sister ran straight over to me, and my brother kept screaming for us to close the blinds. We couldn't see anything, nothing at all. But there was no way I was going to ignore him, not with the way he looked. He was terrified in a way I had never seen before. Everything after that felt strange, like time had slowed down. The room looked blurry around the edges. My sister and I rushed to close the blinds, and then we grabbed my brother, trying to calm him down. He was still pale, still screaming, barely able to breathe. Then, after the blinds were closed, he suddenly screamed that it had come inside. That was the moment I truly started to panic. I picked him up. He was only in a diaper because we had been getting ready to change him into pajamas. He kept saying it was following us. We ran toward the sliding glass door, and I tore through the blinds like I wasn't even thinking. I opened the door and rushed outside onto the patio with him in my arms. For just a second, he calmed down. His breathing got a little steadier. He wasn't crying as hard. And then his panic came right back. He looked beside us and screamed that it was standing next to us. I swear, I almost dropped right there. We all ran upstairs and got out the front of the house. Honestly, that is what I should have done from the beginning. We ended up sitting on the front steps, shaken and freezing with fear. I pulled out my phone to check my partner's location, and that made everything feel even worse. She had only left a few minutes earlier. She was still just down the block. I called her, completely frantic, trying to explain what had just happened. She kept telling me she had barely been gone, and she didn't understand how all of that could have happened so fast. But it did. We stayed outside until she got back. It must have been at least 30 or 40 minutes, and none of us wanted to go back in. Another thing I remember is my cat. He had been inside the whole time, but during all the chaos downstairs, I didn't see him anywhere. When we were outside on the front steps, I looked up and saw him sitting in the upstairs window, just watching us. Afterward, my brother seemed completely spaced out. My sister held him because he was always closest with her, and she kept comforting him. When we finally got him to say anything, he said it was a huge figure. He described it as yellowish white, almost glowing. But he was so little, only 3 or 4, so it was hard for him to explain exactly what he saw. As he got older, whenever we brought it up, he said he didn't remember it. But I know he wasn't playing around. There is no way. The fear on his face, the way he almost passed out, the way the whole room felt before he even screamed, that wasn't a kid joking. It is still one of the most terrifying things I have ever experienced. I've had other strange things happen in my life, and my grandfather's house always seemed to attract weird energy. But that night stands out because my sister and I felt something too. We never saw the figure, but we felt the change in the room. And my brother saw something that scared him beyond words. I've never really sat down and told all of this from beginning to end, but all of these things happened around the same period of my life, about 4 or 5 years ago, when I was living in this one house. And I know people say this kind of thing all the time, but I really mean it when I say that house felt haunted. Not just old house with weird noises haunted. It felt heavy, like something was always there, just slightly out of sight. The first thing that really shook me happened when my friend Mason and I were messing around with a Ouija board. We were younger, probably acting braver than we actually were, treating it like some creepy little game. But then, it stopped feeling like a game. The board spelled out his mother's name. His mom had passed away, and I knew that, but I didn't know much beyond that. Then it spelled out Mason's name too. He got quiet, and after a moment, he asked what day she died. I had no idea what the date was. None. And then, the board spelled it out. After that, it spelled his name again. Mason looked completely different after that. He just said he wanted to stop. So we stopped. And he never brought it up again. Not once. He wasn't the kind of person who would joke about something like that, especially not about his mom, and honestly, that scared me more than anything. Another thing that happened in that house was the knocking. It happened several times, maybe 6 or 7 altogether. I'd be in the bathroom and I'd hear a clear knock on the door. Not a creak. Not the house settling. A knock. I would say, "I'm in here," thinking it was my mom or my grandpa. Then nothing. No answer. No footsteps walking away. Just silence. I lived there with my mom and grandpa, and my mom swore up and down it wasn't her. And by now, she would have admitted it if she'd been messing with me. My grandpa was a heavier guy too, so if it had been him, I definitely would have heard him walking away. But every time, there was just the knock, and then nothing. It stopped for a while, then happened a couple more times, and then eventually it just quit completely. We moved out not long after. One day, my mom and I were packing things up in the living room. We were standing there talking, surrounded by boxes and random furniture, and there was this regular chair sitting in the middle of the room. Not a rolling chair, not on wheels, just a normal chair. While we were talking, it moved. Just a few inches, but enough for both of us to see it. We both stopped. Neither of us said anything for a second, because there wasn't anything to say. There was no explanation that made sense. It didn't slide because someone bumped it. It didn't shift because the floor was uneven. It just moved, and we both saw it. There was also this hallway in the house that I still think about. It was off the living room, tucked into the corner, and it led to the bathroom. The washer and dryer were back there too, so it was just this small, plain little hallway. But something about it felt wrong. During the day, it was uncomfortable. At night, it was awful. Every time I came out of the bathroom and the hallway was dark, I felt this overwhelming need to run back into the living room. Not walk fast. Run. It felt like something was pressing down on me. Like the air in that hallway was thicker than the air anywhere else in the house. I never felt that way in my bedroom. I never felt it in the kitchen. It was only that hallway. And my mom felt it too. She agreed that there was something strange about that part of the house. It had this dark, suffocating energy. And I know that sounds dramatic, but that is the only way I can describe it. The last experience didn't happen inside the house, but it happened in the same town, and it still bothers me. My mom was doing deliveries for Walmart, kind of like DoorDash, and I was riding with her. It was getting late, the sun was going down, and we decided this would be our last order of the night. The item was a small pink instant camera. The address was way out on the edge of town, maybe 20 minutes away. As we got closer, the paved roads turned into a dirt and gravel road, and the whole area started feeling more isolated. Then, out of nowhere, I started crying. Not just tearing up, I mean sobbing. I had this horrible feeling come over me. It was sudden and intense, like every part of me was screaming that we needed to leave. I kept begging my mom to turn around. I couldn't explain why. I just knew that I did not want to be there. She kept driving because she still needed to deliver the order, but I could tell she was starting to get uneasy because of how badly I was reacting. When we reached the spot where the house was supposed to be, there was nothing. The picture in the app showed a nice house in an open area, but when we looked around, all we saw were dense woods and a dead end. No house, no driveway, no porch light. Nothing. That was when my mom got really uncomfortable too. She canceled the order, turned the car around, and we left. And the strangest part is that as soon as we got off that dirt road, I stopped crying. The feeling was just gone. It was like someone had lifted something off my chest. I still think about that night. I still wonder what would have happened if my mom had tried to get out of the car or keep looking for the house. I'm grateful she listened to that feeling, even if neither of us could explain it. So those are the experiences I had. My mom has her own stories too, and she completely believes in ghosts. After living in that house, and after everything that happened around that town, I understand why. I don't know exactly what was there, but I know what I felt. And I know I never want to feel it again. I have more than a few stories from my grandfather's house, and honestly, some of them still don't sit right with me. This one happened back in the summer of 2016. At the time, my mom had her own place with my siblings, but whenever I came to visit from my dad's house, she would usually bring us over to my grandpa's. I was 16, my mom was in her late 30s, my little sister was about 7, and my brother was still just a baby. That night, we were all sleeping downstairs in the living room. It wasn't a basement or anything, just the main floor of the house. My mom was on the pull-out bed from the couch, and I was across from her on a smaller couch. Behind my head was the hallway that led toward the garage, and from where my mom was lying, that same hallway was kind of diagonal from her. It was already really late, definitely after 1:30 in the morning. We were both still awake, scrolling on our phones, texting, watching videos, that sort of thing. The TV was on too, but neither of us was really watching it. It was mostly there for a little light and background noise. After a while, my mom said, "Okay, we should try to sleep," and she wanted to turn the TV off. The second she said that, my stomach dropped. I wasn't usually scared of the dark, so it felt strange. It was just this sudden, awful feeling that we should not turn that TV off. I told her I didn't want it off, but she brushed it off and turned it off anyway. So now we were sitting there in the dark, and I remember texting my friend, telling them I felt really anxious and that my mom hadn't listened to me. A few minutes passed. Then we heard it. A scream. And I don't mean a little noise, or something that could have been the house settling. I mean a full, top-of-your-lungs scream. I froze so badly I could barely breathe. I just lay there, completely stiff, and then I finally whispered, "Mom, what was that?" The scary part was how scared she sounded when she answered. That made it so much worse. She didn't know what it was either. She started reaching around to turn the TV back on, and before she could get it on, it happened again. Another scream. Once the TV came back on, we were both shaking. I kept looking over at her and asking, "What was that? What was that?" over and over, as if she somehow had the answer. I knew she didn't. I was just terrified and needed someone to make it make sense. We both agreed it sounded like it had come from right behind our heads. But that didn't make any sense. We weren't even lying that close to each other. There were several steps between us, and still, somehow, it sounded like it was right behind both of us at the same time. We kept the TV on for the rest of the night. I don't think I slept at all until the sun started coming up. My mom has never been the type to immediately deny something or try to explain it away just to feel better. That night, though, we didn't talk about it much, because she didn't want my little sister or baby brother waking up and getting scared. The next day, we talked about it again, and we both said the same thing. It sounded like it was directly behind us. I still don't have an explanation for it. And around that same time, something else happened in that house. One evening, we were all upstairs having dinner at my grandpa's. Everyone was at the table, passing dishes around. No one was downstairs. Now, the door downstairs that led to the garage was extremely heavy. In colder months, it could slam if you didn't shut it properly. But in the spring and summer, the heat made it expand, and it was much harder to close. It almost never slammed on its own. You would have had to hold it wide open and let it go, and even then, it usually wouldn't slam that hard. But while we were all sitting there eating, that downstairs garage door slammed so hard the whole table went quiet. Everyone looked at each other. Even my grandpa, who usually ignored anything strange that happened in that house. looked concerned. I ran downstairs to check, and of course, nothing was there. The garage was open, it was summer, and there was no reason that door should have slammed like that. That house had so many moments like that. I've had experiences there, in other family homes, even strange things as a kid that involved sleep paralysis, and one of my older cousins, Mara. I'm 25 now, and thankfully, over the last few years, everything has mostly died down. I'm grateful for that. But I still like sharing the stories, because I know what happened, and I know I wasn't the only one there for some of them. And to this day, I still don't have an explanation. I want to tell you about something that happened after several days of really intense anxiety. It was the kind that sits deep in your stomach. That heavy, sinking feeling you can't quite shake. My girlfriend and I had both been barely sleeping. Over the course of 4 days, I had maybe gotten around 10 hours total. She came over to my place because she wanted to physically be there, just to help me settle down enough to sleep. And then she was planning to go home. But right before I finally drifted off, something happened. My whole body suddenly locked up. It was this violent muscle spasm that made me tense from head to toe. And at the same time, this wave of fear just flooded through me. It honestly felt like someone had grabbed the center of my back, right along my spine, and squeezed. I was wide awake after that. It scared both of us badly. There was no almost asleep anymore. The room felt wrong, and I felt completely rattled. Then, out of nowhere, I got better. I don't mean gradually. I mean it was like something just lifted. My energy came back. My head cleared. I didn't feel exhausted anymore, even though I should have been completely wrecked. I felt like myself again. She noticed it too. We just stared at each other, both trying to understand what had shifted. It was one of those moments where neither person has an explanation, but both people know something happened. After that, we decided we were going to leave and go to her house instead. She went out to the car first while I stayed behind to grab a few things I had forgotten. Later, she told me that while she was sitting there waiting, this awful feeling came over her. She said she suddenly felt sick and unsettled, almost the same way I had been feeling. That was when we both started thinking that maybe something had been trying to latch on to us. Maybe it was feeding off the anxiety, or maybe our fear made us easier to reach. I don't know. But what I do know is that as soon as we left the house, we both felt normal again. And there is some history with that place. Before the current house was built, there was an old hoarder house on the property. It was beyond saving. The air conditioning unit was falling through the roof. There was only one narrow path through the clutter. No working plumbing. Bags of old diapers. Decay everywhere. The woman who lived there died inside the home, and her cats were left with her. There were dozens of animals connected to that place, and some of their ashes were still there. A neighbor eventually called for a wellness check, and that was how the fire department found her. The energy there was hard to explain. It was heavy, rotten, dark in a way that felt deeper than just sadness. It felt wrong. Eventually, that house was torn down, and a new one was built on the lot. But ever since then, I have seen this shadowy figure standing in the doorway of what used to be her room. She and her mother had lived there since the 70s, and they both died there. So did so many animals. At one point, we even found her mother's ashes, and I took them up into the mountains so I could spread them somewhere peaceful. Still, back at the house, I keep having to shut that door. I have known something was there. I used to think maybe it was her, and that she just didn't want to leave. A couple of years ago, I tried to sage the house, but the reaction I felt was strong enough that I stopped. I told myself I should leave it alone, but after this experience, I'm done leaving it alone. Whatever is there has to go. As I'm saying this, I'm preparing myself. I have sage ready. I've placed quartz and rose quartz around the house. The feather I use for cleansing is out, and the crystals are being purified. The windows are open. My intention is clear, and I fully believe this is going to work. This is the strongest presence I have ever personally felt. I also think I'm more sensitive to this kind of thing because of everything I've experienced over the years. There was a time when I used psychedelics heavily, and that changed the way I understand consciousness. I've had experiences that made me feel like I live more inside my awareness than inside my physical body. Because of that, energy affects me deeply. The person I live with, Mason, has barely noticed anything, but for me, it has been different. I've struggled with depression the whole time I've been connected to this house, even before the new one was built. At one point, I was driving close to 3,000 miles a month just to be away from the place and feel lighter somewhere else. So this time, I'm not backing down. I'll share what happens afterward, but I already know how this ends. This house is getting cleared. I guide soul journey sessions where people go deep within themselves and connect with their higher self. And something I notice again and again is that people often come in carrying anxiety, sadness, fear, or this deep feeling that they do not belong anywhere. On the outside, their life may look completely fine. They may have a home, work, relationships, all the things that should make life feel stable. But inside, they feel empty, restless, scared, and many times they do not understand why. What I have learned through this work is that the reason is not always from this life. I had a session recently with a woman. I will call her Helena. She came because she felt anxious almost all the time. She was depressed, afraid of being alone, and she had this painful feeling that no place ever truly felt like home. When she went into the session, she found herself as a little girl. But it was not this lifetime. She was in another life, maybe a couple 100 years ago. Her name in that life was Melina. She was about 6 years old, barefoot in the grass, wearing a faded green dress, holding a small cloth pouch filled with stones and little forest treasures. She was lost near the edge of a thick woodland not far from her village, and she was terrified. There were wild animals in the forest. She had run away from home after feeling hurt and misunderstood, and now she did not know how to get back. As the session opened more, we saw the rest of her life. At 24, she married a kind man, but she did not truly love him. She married him because it was expected. It was what her family wanted. It was what women did. Later in life, her mother passed away, and Melina carried so many words inside her that she had never said out loud. Her husband eventually left, and she raised her children mostly alone. She lived a long life, but it was a hard one. By the time she died, she was old, thin, poor, and deeply tired. Then, in the afterlife, her husband came to her, and he was not angry. He told her he had loved her. He told her he forgave her. He wanted her to know she was not bad. She was not broken. She had only been doing the best she could with the life she had been given. The guilt she had carried was not really about him leaving. It was about marrying him without real love in her heart, and he wanted her to finally let that guilt go. Then her mother came forward too, and Melina told her mother, "I love you." Words she had held back for an entire lifetime. So what does this have to do with Helena's anxiety and depression in this life? Her higher self explained that Helena was still carrying the memory of separation, leaving the village as a child, losing her sense of safety, losing family, entering a marriage without love, losing her mother, being left by her husband, dying alone. Each separation had left a mark in her energy. So when she came into this life, her body remembered. It remembered being alone. It remembered not being chosen. It remembered loving people and losing them. That is why she was afraid to trust, afraid to belong, afraid to let people close. Because somewhere deep inside, belonging did not feel safe. Belonging meant one day it could be taken away. Her depression was connected to another pattern too. In that past life, she had slowly stopped doing the things that made her feel alive. She became practical, silent, dutiful. She survived, but she did not really live. And in this life, Helena had done something similar. She had stopped going to the ocean, stopped spending time outside, stopped moving her body in ways she loved, stopped connecting with nature. Her soul was asking her to come back to life. Even the pain she carried in her hip was not really about the hip. Her higher self said it was connected to an old heart wound, held so deeply in the body that it had begun to speak through pain. The healing was gentle. White light was brought in for the anxiety. Golden light moved through the heart and hip. But the real message from higher self was very simple. Return to what restores you. Go back to nature. Go back to water. Go back to warmth. Go back to the things your heart remembers as joy. And let people in slowly, not all at once. Slowly enough that your body can learn it is safe now. So the lesson here is this. If you feel anxious or depressed and you cannot explain why, maybe the reason is not only from today. Maybe it comes from childhood. Maybe it comes from something your mind forgot, but your body still remembers. Or maybe, for some people, it comes from another lifetime entirely. That feeling of never belonging, that fear of being alone, that sadness with no clear cause. It may be an old memory still living inside the body. And healing does not always mean fighting the feeling. Sometimes healing means listening to it, understanding where it came from, and then gently showing your body that things are different now. You are not there anymore. You are here. You are safe. You can begin again. If this speaks to you, you can try this simple exercise. Sit somewhere quiet. Close your eyes. Take 3 slow breaths. Imagine you are standing at the edge of a misty forest. You feel the fear of being lost. You feel the old loneliness. But this time, you are not a helpless child. You are your adult self, and there is light in your hands. Bring your attention to your heart. Notice if there is a cord, chain, knot, or heaviness there. Do not force it away. Do not pull at it. Just place your hand over your heart and say, either out loud or inside yourself, I see you. I am not there anymore. I am here now, and I am safe. Then imagine golden light pouring down from above you, filling your heart, softening the old wound, warming the places that have felt forgotten. Stay there for 5 to 10 minutes. Try this before sleep for 2 weeks. The body needs time to learn that the old story is over. And maybe, little by little, your heart will begin to believe it too. I was younger when this happened, and even now, thinking back on it gives me this strange, unsettled feeling. I know it may not sound like the most dramatic, scary story, but it scared me badly enough that I still remember the little details. And honestly, I have never had a proper explanation for it. It was a school night, sometime in the evening, and I remember my parents calling me to go brush my teeth and get ready for bed. Before I left my room, I put my tablet, my wired earphones, and my phone on my desk. I can still picture it clearly. I stacked them near the front left corner, but not so close that they could just slide off on their own. When I came back, the earphones were still plugged into the tablet, but they were hanging off the edge of the desk and touching the floor. At first, I didn't think anything weird had happened. I figured maybe the wire had pulled things a little, or maybe someone had brushed past the desk and knocked them without noticing. So I picked everything up and moved it. This time, I put the tablet, earphones, and phone right at the back center of the desk, pushed up near the wall. I remember thinking that there was no way they could fall from there. It felt secure. It felt done. Then I went to bed. For maybe 20 minutes or so, I was lying there trying to fall asleep. I had my eyes closed, just shifting around under the blanket, when suddenly there was this loud, sharp bang. My eyes opened immediately, and I just froze. The room was dark except for a bit of light coming through the gaps in the curtains, and in that dim light, I could see my phone lying on the floor. It wasn't next to the desk. It was much farther away, closer to the wardrobe across the room. That was what scared me most. It hadn't just slipped down. It looked like it had been thrown or knocked with force. It landed on a rug, too, but somehow the sound was still loud enough to make my dad come running. A few seconds later, I heard my parents' bedroom door open. The hallway light came on, and then my dad stepped into my room, asking what I had done to make that noise. I remember getting out of bed and pointing at the phone, trying to explain that I hadn't touched it, that it had been on the desk, that it shouldn't have been able to end up there. I was so shaken that my parents brought me into their room for a while. I sat with them for about an hour, trying to calm down. I remember crying while I explained it, because I knew how strange it sounded, but I also knew exactly what I had seen. Eventually, I went back to my room, but I kept a light on. Nothing else happened that night. Nothing moved again. No more noises. But the whole thing still bothers me, because no matter how many times I go over it in my head, I can't work out how my phone ended up that far from the desk.